Okay, good morning, council, staff, members of the public, and many invited guests this morning. We have a fairly lengthy agenda, so appreciate everybody's patience waiting their turn to do their presentation, and I hope council has pulled up a comfy chair for this morning. I will call the meeting to order, and I will confirm that we have quorum. I can't confirm that this is the first time I think ever that I've had two screens to scroll through. So we have quorum. We have everyone, I believe, with the exception of Councillor Fitzgerald. Councillor Fitzgerald's there as well. Okay, we have everyone present. I will call on this morning Councillor Armour to read the land acknowledgement statement.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe under the terms of the Robertson-Huron Treaty number 61 of 1850 and the Williams Treaties of 1923. We commit to acknowledge, learn, educate, create opportunity, honor sacred places, and take actions towards the real truth and reconciliation in support of our commitment to walk in the path together in respect, peace, and harmony for future generations.
Thank you for that. I will note that the clerk has assigned movers and seconders for all motions. And the first motion is moved by Deputy Mayor Alcock and seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. And it is recommended that the General Committee meeting agenda dated Wednesday, June 30th, 2021 be adopted as printed and circulated, with the deletion of item 6.3.7, the transit service levels. And we are going to postpone that report for a month because of some new information that we just received this morning, and it's not that time sensitive that we can't deal with this in 30 days from now. All in favor of that? And that carries. And I will note that Councillor Fitzgerald is away on holidays, but he's joining us and has limited internet, so his video is not on because of that reason, but he is here and he does raise his yellow hand to vote. So I'll try to acknowledge that each time. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we will move right on to our invited presentations. And the first one, I'd like to welcome Stasia and Sean from Stemsky Kelly Associates, who have been working on our community wayfinding strategy, and they are going to tell us where they are today. So welcome, Sean. Welcome, Stasia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor Terziano. And thanks everyone for being here this morning. We're going to give you an update on the wayfinding strategy for Huntsville. I will need to share my screen for the presentation, if I may, and I'm going to move into that right now. Let me see. Sorry, wrong one. How's that for everybody?
Yeah, there we go. Great.
There we go. We're up now?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So we're going to make this brief and quick for you. There's lots of content. There's lots of work of this type of project. So bear with me. And I do have Stacia Stepsky on the line as well as Jacqueline Short if there are questions forthcoming from this. So I'll talk quickly about us a bit. What is wayfinding, the phases and strategy components, the progress we've had to date, what we've heard from the community and those folks we spoke to, and then parts of the system that include, hierarchy, the destination list, the modes we're looking at, how folks arrive into Huntsville as a schematic, and then some more information on nodes and a messaging chart and our next steps. So Stemsky Kelly Associates, we're a small kind of boutique firm out of the Elora Fergus area, if you know where that is, along the Grand River down towards, I guess, the Guelph area towards Kitchener. We do a lot of work with wayfinding. We do a lot of work with rural communities. So past January, we were retained to facilitate a comprehensive design of a town-wide wayfinding system. And generally, wayfinding, the middle box talks about signage. And I think a lot of folks think wayfinding is really just signage. we're really working to find one's way in the built and natural environment. And when we're dealing with, very interesting and asset heavy destination geographic locations, there's a lot of organization of information. So the process of organizing that information to help users find the way is paramount to this. And then signage design does come into play, and any successful plan assesses and identifies the issues and sources of confusion in one's environment. And if you're certainly from the Huntsville area, you'll have behavior and patterns that you follow all the time. You just know where things are. But when you have guests and, the destination appeal of Huntsville and that neck of the woods, we need something that's a little more of a higher level communication system. Solution. So it's really important for us to get that all together as a strategy. This is really going to be a 3-phase project. We're about halfway through our second part of it, the first one being a foundations report. And then we move into site design and location plan, and then we help the town with a bit of implementation. The strategy is designed to reinforce the sense of place, identity, and interconnectedness. But we want to improve the entry, the orientation, identification within the town and within the community and its chosen destinations. And that's what it would result in. Strategy components entail about 6 items. The first 3 kind of backgrounded with the green A, B, and C is what we're really working on now. And that's the process work part. And then we move more into the strategy document. The destination list is determined for sign messaging. There's a lot of information, as you know. There's place names, there's directional information, in some cases, minor regulatory information. How do you get all that onto one sign? That's really, really important real estate. But the destination node and route identification plays a huge part on this. Where do the signs go? Where are the nodes where people make decisions to go to whatever destinations they're going to? And then obviously, locating that sign so it's actually mostly effective, and any mapping and messaging that goes with it. We'll move into component D in due time, and that's what everyone wants to see, the family of signs. What is the look of the actual sign? And that's always a fun part, I get it, but it's the front end work that really, really informs the sign concepts. And then the preferred family of signs is the one that will be selected. We would work with that. And then we move more into that phasing implementation that addresses budgetary opportunities for the town. Our progress to date is about providing the town of Huntsville with a framework for wayfinding strategy. So we've created a foundation document, thorough background, best practice review. We've looked at existing signs throughout the community. We have analyzed those, and we've actually had stakeholder and public engagement to date. A memo has been issued to the town providing draft report materials, which you should have in your package. These include an asset and destination listing, decision node identification, some preliminary sign location mapping and messaging information as well. On the stakeholder engagement piece, there were a series of individual interviews done, and there was an online public engagement survey. And I think close to 140 people participated, certainly on the online piece. But we've talked to participants from the town, staff, members of council, identified stakeholder groups, and the overall public. And just to really give you an idea of what destinations that were identified from respondents to take priority, and this is pretty standard, any community that we work in, this is the things that really rise to the top. 70% of the respondents say public washrooms need to be identified, parks and conservation areas, parking, heritage sites, and trails. Pretty common, all pretty close in the percentages. But that's on par for everything. And you can see down there that's percentage of the 138 respondents to close to 140 I mentioned earlier on the online survey piece. What we heard was that more than 50% would recommend the following destinations to a visitor: Muskoka Heritage Place, Algonquin Provincial Park, the Arrowhead Provincial Park, Hunters Bay Trail, Lions Lookout. But 50% also did not know how to get to the Stevenson Cemetery or the former Trans-Canada Trail, now the Great Trail, Glenwood Park in the neighborhood, Golden Pheasant Beach, Goodwin Park, and Thailand Park in a neighborhood park as well. continue of what we heard, they're just visual styles that we try to, pair out from the community and what folks feel is appropriate for the community. It's really important to do this because we want to meet expectations, and you certainly don't want to shock anyone and contrast what they would expect unnecessarily. So when we look at that, there was 4 things that really came to mind, and you can really see on the left-hand side with that pie chart that cottage, country, and historic town style prevailed, with historic town coming a close second. Now, we don't have the percentages up, but you can get the piece of the pies, and you can understand how dominant those are. But still, let's be clear and legible, and let's be simple and consistent. And that's the great thing about these types of programs for communities, is that the consistency is really form giving for communities, and looking like you're really taking care and you have a lot of pride in what you're doing. But legibility was a big piece in that lower pie chart. People still wanted things to stand out in the color and the town branding and the maintenance and accessibility and uniqueness pieces. But the legibility is a big part of it, and obviously that's why we're here. Most respondents use Google Maps in tandem with directional signage on the street currently, and that likely will not change going forward. Now, how do we figure out what destinations level are we dealing with? There's 5 levels, and the way to look at a chart like this is really that a level 1 means that it's a major destination, which tells us, well, we can probably start notifying the user or whoever's reading the sign further out from the destination, working down to getting tighter. So at a level 1, those are major destinations or things that are regionally attractive to your guests. Information responding to vehicular traffic, accessible destinations with ample parking, and how messaging begins at the periphery of the wayfinding sequence. And it's definitely a sequence. You start here, you get introduced to something, and then you get reinforced in your direction, and then you finally become that master. You know exactly where you are. But we can work down. You can see there's 5 levels here. I don't have to go through all of them. This is also in the package as well. Maybe just the titles: popular attraction and landmarks, different than major and regional attractions. Then we'll get into things that are a little more known to local community, local destinations, parks and attractions, and that probably ties in with level 4, the neighborhood destinations and local level services. And then there's seasonal venues that we will not forget as well, and we'll have included certainly in the level matrix. So I'll show you 2 pages quickly of a destination list. And this is really just for information. There's no real correction here right now at this time. But we break these down into industry standards and categories: districts, government buildings, cultural or institutional, tourist services, public amenities, and transportation. And you can see where we've jotted down those things that we've been noted to us for the community and for the town, and where they go, and we work through this. And this is still to be approved. So we're pushing this. We're pushing this into categories right now, or some of the destinations into the categories right now, and assigning levels to them. So you can see that on the sidebars to each one of them. And then recreational is the big piece for everybody. And where does that all go? All in all, you'll look and you go, wow, there's a lot of destinations and a lot of clarity that could be opportune for the town of Huntsville to take advantage of. Destination summary quickly. Again, we have assigned these levels to the destinations that have been given us to date. And, a level 1, things that are really, really draw intensive, meaning, they're a real true destination regionally, downtown. The Civic Center and Town Hall for Huntsville, the Rotary Village train station, Steam Museum, Muskoka Heritage Place. Obviously, a visitor information center would be important. The Canada Summit Center. And these typically do build, like, as you get along to levels. You'll find as you get into a lower level, you will have a lot more neighborhoody type destinations and smaller recreational bits that get included in there. So you think, you go big and you get down and you start drilling down to those smaller in-town destinations. The modes that we are appealing to at this time will include motorists, pedestrians, cyclists, and boaters, obviously. Just by where you are in the geography, it makes a whole lot of sense. But motorists look for signage that's clear, concise, large font. There are standards for this. We all know, we all understand when we can and we cannot see a sign, which is usually the case. We can't read it. A little bit trivia: the average person looks at a sign for under 4 seconds. So that's how quick you have to make these really, really work for yourself. You need to have ample spacing between directional changes and the signage itself. And the routes account for traffic patterns, speed, road speeds, decision nodes, and major versus minor roads. It's really about the behavior and how folks will use, the majority of folks will use their routing in a vehicle to get to whatever destination. Pedestrians, again, pedestrian scale makes sense, and it does matter. It's adequate in size and height, unique from car-oriented signage. And we do get a lot of questions on whether can we not use the same sign for both. At times we can, and at other times we cannot, just because the modes are separated. Cyclists are a little different. They will use both the pedestrian scale and motorist signs just because of the mode they're in. But if you have designated cycling routes identified by the municipality, and we have bike lanes and shared roadways or trail systems, there could be a signage opportunity certainly there. And then boaters really need to understand where they're going to, and hopefully most of the boaters do. And if anything, making your mark on a waterway is important, and welcoming water traffic, and it's typically seasonal use. We do a lot of work at a schematic level, and we look at kind of how folks come in, arrive, and stage. That means where do they park, where do they go, and where they disperse into the assets and destinations you have in a community. So this is our schematic we work for ourselves, and you can see how the folks would come in through a primary vehicular route, and then seek some parking and or docking, and then how do they move to a downtown district, for instance, or how do they get to a parks and trails? And you can see how we start thinking about this, and then building up this sort of bubble effect of ranges of where signs need to be. And this is also a bit more scale revealing, the spatial defining size. Like, there's some big pieces here, and where's the big messaging going to happen? So a lot of in-house stuff for us on this, but just to give you some of our own process and our thinking on it. We also work up for ourselves a node understanding, just where folks coming along and making decisions. A lot of times off the major highways or significant roadways, it will be at a point where there's intersections for obvious reasons, certainly for motorists. But you can also see, there's some smaller circles on this plan, and talking about, if the epicenter in this case is sort of the downtown area, you can see how many nodes and decision points individuals traveling into your town will have to make. So, that's really of interest to us, because that starts defining how we locate and how we message every sign. And, you might have an intersection, and 3 of those corners might have a messaging component or a structure or a marker with signs on them. So, it is a craft in a way, and we certainly have to be mindful of pattern, behavior, road speed, the types of messaging, and what's next. Where are we taking them? It is a sequence. Just breaking this down a little further, if you look at Highway 60 and Highway 11 along the left, there's actually four key nodes, decision nodes where you make, and they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4 on this diagram. And as you can see, as you come into number 1, how many smaller decision nodes there may happen. It may happen and occur as one is approaching the downtown area. Again, we do this for ourselves for every access point to a destination that we're dealing with. It's really important for us to understand the behavior or the perceived behavior of how things are working. And it's really important. So, and in some cases, there's options, where we hit a fork in the road, we can go this way or that way, and we need to figure out, if someone goes down that road, how do we get them back on track to the main destination. And for instance, this is the routes to the Summit Center and Heritage Place, which we've had some interesting chit chat on already. Do we want to enter at the front door or the back door? I think the current behavior is telling us right now, it seems like a lot of folks are entering at back doors of destinations and not the front door. So again, rationalizing a route, making it work, and proposing perhaps a new way of doing things. It's part of the exploration. Doesn't mean it's going to be, but it is part of the exploration. Is there a better way? And there might be a better way for a whole variety of reasons, because you have that infrastructure in place. You're not cutting through more residential neighborhoods. You want to keep them on main roads. We will consider that and work with that as well. But in this case, you can see things like, the Summit Center and Heritage Place, obviously, and the Lions Lookout is a big piece. The Train Museum and Skating Rink. There's a lot of destinations in this sort of, area, this area in Conroy Park down to the bottom. But, the routing and how we get to them is a paramount concern. So looking at different routes from Lions Lookout and Memorial Park, similar again, doodling this up for ourselves, making a bubble diagram, understanding where parking may be, and how do we make our decision nodes work for us. And there's proposed vehicular route with this one as well. That's the fun part for us. The more tedious part is actually creating a messaging chart, which is in progress right now. Obviously, I think hopefully you get the idea that, on the far left of this chart, you have reference ID, and you'll get a good sense that there's going to be a lot of messaging opportunities and needs within the town of Huntsville, and we need to create, the types of signs that are going to do that for us. And then what is that messaging that goes on to them? And if you go across the top of this chart, what's that primary messaging, and is there anything that's maybe secondary or alternative messaging? And we have sign information, we have site information. So again, a lot of information. You have some very exclusive real estate on these signs. We have to make it work. We have to, we go back to our online survey and want to understand the review and all that. And folks wanting us to be clear and legible. How do we pare this down and make it still working? So we'll do this, and we'll have all the signs that we envision and recommend for the town of Huntsville noted, messaged, located, and phased. So next steps for us, we're going to be working on a couple of design concepts, and this is what our family of signs may be. You'll get signs, again, that might be more conducive to vehicular traffic, others to pedestrian or cyclists. So there'll be a range of different sizes and different types that will be available to this project. We'll want to engage back with the public regarding the design concepts. We want to find out what people think works for Huntsville and what does not work. And in August, we're hoping to come back to a presentation to council with that information, with a prepared preferred design concept. We want to confirm the messaging chart and sign locations, obviously, before that time, working with staff, and prepare budget and implementation strategy to go with that presentation to council. And I think that's where we're going to leave it for now, and I can certainly, with Stacia and Jacqueline, ask questions if need be. I will stop sharing.
Okay, thanks, Sean. I think we will have some questions. That's a lot of information, but let's start with Deputy Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Sean, thank you for a great presentation. I read it, and last night got very excited about the next stage. The one thing I maybe I need to be reminded, in your list of destinations, there was no mention of any of our community halls, and the one in particular I'm thinking of is the community hall in Port Sydney. And I couldn't remember, maybe we're just focusing on the downtown, but I think we can't miss the hall in Port Sydney. I know for a fact a lot of people go there from out of town for various functions that are held there, and it's very much a part of the broader community as a whole. So your thoughts on why we didn't include the community halls, in particular that one?
Yeah, thank you for that question through you, Mayor. I believe, we had our process of talking to stakeholders, in addition to talking to the online survey, had not identified those at this time. Again, this is a work in progress, and this is the type of information we certainly do need. And if there's a will, there's certainly going to be a way to get those included. I have no other indication why they were not part of the destinations at this time. But again, like I say, we're building that. So perhaps that's a little more of a, well, maybe I'll call it an oversight. And I know there are some situations where some of the destinations tend to be a little too far to be included. So, we'll take that geographic location and ensure that, they're within reach for the sequencing to work. So we can reevaluate and look at that and certainly ensure that we have a proper response for that.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Sean.
Councillor Stone.
Thank you. Presentation was fantastic, and all the additional information we got, I loved reading people's comments, and I really look forward to the next steps. A couple things did jump out at me. I thought these things could be removed. So that would be cemeteries, Can Lake with the outdoor skating rink. We haven't been able to do that for a few years now. And the flag park seems unnecessary. But my one very important piece for me is public access to water. And I'm not talking about the ones that are boat launches that you've already identified. I'm talking about the end of a road down a horrible steep cliff that is a public access to water. And I really want these identified. The neighbors often don't want them identified, but I think it's really important for our town to know that there are these access to water all over the place.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Stone. Through the mayor, I don't know. I don't have a quick answer for you. I think on that one right now, and I think it's probably a town decision or a council decision on whether we sign these or not, and that's something you'd have to discuss and bring back to us. Well, my experience in many communities that there are things you want to bring people to, and there's other things you do not want to bring people to necessarily, at least through a science program. So, we'd be looking for further direction on that at this time. We haven't heard, I don't believe any desire to have that done, but you're raising it now, and perhaps that's something that needs to be looked at.
Can I jump in?
Yep.
Can you hear me? Yes. Stacia here. Thank you. I think there had been a number of comments from the written comments in our online survey from residents that they did not want public access to they pay so many taxes, and they were a little cautionary about including access to the water near them. So that was just something that we did hear a little bit about in that online survey. So, but it is something that could be also addressed in terms of a simple logo in the program. The other thing to consider is safety. And are we directing people to a quality space and quality access to the water? Is there parking? Is it safe to get there? So a lot of things to consider in that.
If I could just follow up.
Yep, go ahead, Bob, or Councillor Stone.
So I think it's of paramount importance that it is identified as public access. This is public access to water. And the people that can't afford the $500,000 properties on the water, we want them to get there. I think it's hugely important. And I think my colleagues might agree, but I would be happy to put a vote to it. We've got council here right now, so perhaps we could make something happen, but it's of paramount importance to me.
Madam CAO.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just as a follow-up to the discussion that took place at Council on Monday night, as part of the life-saving device discussion that Council had, staff will be revisiting all of the water access points in the town of Huntsville. They will be recategorizing those, and as part of that process, they'll be identifying where there potentially are hazards, where it's safe to access, what the intention of those water accesses are. And they'll also be bringing back, included in the report, recommendations with respect to signage. So I do believe, Madam Chair, that will be dealt with through that process with respect to water access points that's going to be looked into by staff.
Sean?
That's great to hear from the CAO. I'll just also mention we've had worked in communities where they've actually dealt with this same sort of challenge, and they've created, certainly along the Grand River, working with regional tourism organizations, Grand River access guidelines that take in safe staging environments to water for watercraft and water use, basically angling, but safety signage, messaging, regulatory signage, and environmental messaging is all part of that. And how do we get them onto the water safely? So just to know there are communities out there, and there's examples out there. We've been involved in a few ourselves that have taken this sort of topic head on.
I think just before I move on to the next question, while we're on this topic, I think there'll be a difference between site signage, which we have many water access points that are in communities that would have site signage that they're there, but not necessarily directional signage downtown to get there because probably of the sheer distance. So, but I think Councillor Stone raises a good point, and whether or not the signage for these more remote locations are part of this strategy or part of a town-wide strategy for our water access, we will make that decision going forward fairly quickly, I think. Councillor Schumacher, thank you for waiting.
Well, no problem. Through you, Your Worship, to Sean. Consistency sort of signing, like I really like the Conroy Park one, but not every park has the ability to sort of have a nice piece of stone there or whatever. And I would agree with Councillor Alcock in the direction to the community centers in our outlying communities is a need, because there's a lot of people who come into town for weddings at those locations, such as Stevenson Hall and the Port Sydney Hall. And those outlying communities do have a lot of little parks, and it's nice to see the consistency signing. So like Creekside Park in Port Sydney, we're going to talk about the tennis courts later on in this agenda. There is no actual signage there that sort of identifies as a town park. I like the consistent signage for those parks, but again, I guess which one is it that we're going to recommend, I guess, going forward? I like the look of the Conroy, but not every ability has that. So those Town of Huntsville signs that are consistent so that everybody knows that the outlying communities as well are all incorporated. Is that something the consensus usually?
Sean?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Schumacher. That's a great point. And it really has to do with scale and destination levels and what we're trying to capture and what we're trying to offer for residents and their guests to the community. But there's a sensibility about that, certainly, about identifying all assets regardless of scale. And you'll want to do that. You'll want to do that. And it might be something that's identified more in a phasing plan. You know, there's going to be situations where you're only going to replace a sign because it needs to be replaced. And there's going to be other issues. We're going to put brand new signage because it's absent. There isn't one. So that laying out of what happens when, at what scale, certainly be part of that bigger matrix for the town. And all things considered, that can be included.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate everyone's comments so far. I guess I hear about everyone wanting, everything signed and wayfinding to all these things. At some point, I worry that maybe we're going to have too many signs. So I think that should be in the back of our minds as well, because there is such a thing as sign pollution. So, if we give everyone the opportunity to know those locations with signage, but I think we should be careful with too much wayfinding and directional stuff to the remote locations, because we could have them from every direction and we'd just be a community of signs. That's it.
And I'm sure, Sean, that your company has faced that in probably every location they do it. So, okay, are there any other questions? If not, thank you so much for the presentation. We look forward to going forward, and hopefully we've provided enough feedback to help in the next step.
That was terrific. Thank you very much. Those are great comments, and yeah, we're happy to move forward, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, our second invited presentation is from our auditors. The Pahappels. Welcome, Drew and Carl, and you've got a 2020 financial update for us.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'll provide some high-level comments in respect of our work as your independent auditors. Our report is on page 1 of the financial statement package, and it is titled Independent Auditors Report. And I would just make some summary comments on this auditor's report. As we can see in the opinion paragraph, we've audited the consolidated financial statements of the Corporation of the Town of Huntsville. These are consolidated financial statements, as they include not only the township accounts, but also the accounts for the public library and for the BIA. In our opinion, the accompanying financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the Corporation of the Town of Huntsville as of December 31st, 2020, in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. I'd like to point out that the basis of our opinion is that we conduct our audit in accordance with Canadian generally accepted auditing standards. We are independent of the municipality in accordance with the ethical requirements that are relevant to our audit of the consolidated financial statements. We believe that the audit evidence that we have obtained is sufficient and appropriate to provide a basis for our opinion. I'd highlight a couple of paragraphs down in the report, the responsibilities of management and those charged with governance for financial statements. Management of the town is responsible for the preparation and fair presentation of consolidated financial statements in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards, and for such internal control as management determines necessary to enable the preparation of consolidated financial statements that are free from material misstatement. Our responsibility, as you can see in the last paragraph on that page, and right at the last sentence, as part of our audit, in accordance with Canadian generally accepted auditing standards, we exercise professional judgment and maintain professional skepticism throughout the audit. We also identify and assess risks of material misstatements in the consolidated financial statements, whether due to fraud, error, design, and perform audit procedures responsive to those risks. As part of our audit process, we obtain an understanding of your internal controls relative to the audit and the design audit procedures that are appropriate in the circumstances. Finally, we evaluate the appropriateness of accounting policies used and the reasonableness of the accounting estimates related to disclosures made by management. We communicate those that are charged with governance regarding, among other matters, the planning, scope, and timing of our audit. In summary, this is our audit report. It's an unqualified, clean auditor's report as a result of those processes and procedures that we carried through. We'd like to, of course, thank Riva and her team. They worked with us, obviously, primarily remotely again this year. They provide us timely and full electronic access to required documentation for us to conduct our procedures. Their provision of that work, the quality of that work was very accurate, such that we were able to conduct our audit effectively and efficiently and on a timely basis. I make quick reference to a couple of notes in the financial statements this year. In note number 2, there's a comment on there was an adjustment in the investment in Lakeland Holdings. So this was adjusted, and your financial statements were adjusted for a small retroactive change in your percentage holdings in Lakeland. And also in note 17, and this is a standard disclosure this year in municipal financial statements across the province, a comment in respect of the issues and risks that arose as a result of the overall COVID situation. And the at times unknown potential effects, if you will, both current and long-term as a result of COVID. Having said that, overall financial statements are, let's say, We feel they're presented fairly in accordance with Canadian generally accepted accounting principles, and we proposed to issue an unqualified report as a result of that. And those would be my summary comments on our independent auditor's report.
Great, thank you. Questions from council? I see no questions at all, so your report is thorough and happily received. And I will also echo our thanks to our treasurer, Julia McKenzie, and Reva Frame for all of their hard work to have that information ready for you to audit. Okay, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your patience waiting through the first deputation, and I am sure we'll see you next year.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, we have a couple deputations. Our first is Sue Hummel and Barb Quinn from the Muskoka Animal Rescue. Welcome, ladies.
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So my name is Sue Hummel and this is my mom, Barb Quinn. We are with Muskoka Animal Rescue. Muskoka Animal Rescue is a completely volunteer-driven private rescue that relies completely on donations from the community as well as adoption fees. We have two branches of the rescue. One is that we work with companion animal rehoming and adoption, as well as we have something we call the Feral Cat Project, which is why we have approached council today. So feral cats are something that we've been dealing with for a number of years now. Some years we have a lot more reach out from the community about them. To date in Huntsville, we've fixed 11 adult feral cats, as well as we've been able to socialize and rehome six kittens from the community as well. So if we get the kittens young enough, we are able to socialize them and adopt them out as pets. The problem with feral cats is that people don't see them as their issue or their problem. Typically they move into a home or they live in an area where cats just happen to be, or someone has dropped some off, and they sort of become a problem. And as we all know, cats are very prolific. And if you start out with 4 cats, it doesn't take long before you have 20 cats. So, but the issue we run into is that a lot of people are saying, not my cat, not my problem. But they do want help. They want to be able to, maintain the population, not have it explode, and make sure that, they're doing their part. So we kind of run into an issue with dealing with them financially, especially with, the pandemic coming on. Muskoka Animal Rescue's fundraising efforts have really been curtailed. We haven't been able to do as much as we normally would, if at all, really. Currently, we recently entered into an agreement with the town of Bracebridge. They are providing $2,000 worth of support for our TNR trap, neuter, return efforts within Bracebridge and the surrounding geographic area. And we are hoping that we can maybe garner some support from some of the other towns. We do carry a commercial liability insurance policy that where the town is a named insured on it. And so that, that covers, so they're not, held liable for anything that may happen as a result of our efforts. So typical costs for one cat to be trapped, neutered, and returned. We typically take them to the OSPCA spay neuter clinic in Barrie. We are charged $75 per cat to spay or neuter, as well as $25 for a 3-year rabies shot. Feral cats they're ear tipped, so that we're able to discern which cats have been fixed and which haven't if we're dealing with a colony. And as well, we provide all of the transportation to and from the clinic. We also, if we're dealing with a member of the community, we will allow them to trap prior to the spay neuter day. We will house the cats for a couple of days prior to their appointment, and then as they recover before either returning them. Now, sometimes feral cats can't go back to where they've been trapped for whatever reason. It may not be an ideal location. The people may be moving. Sometimes it's just not possible. So we have a barn cat program where we have members of the community that have, you know, sort of a workshop or a barn area where they have the cats would be cared for, but they're still allowed to be essentially feral, and they help with their rodent population. So we routinely reach out to the community to see if we have people interested in the working cat program as well. And that's basically it.
Okay, thank you, Sue. I assume you're Sue.
I am, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Good presentation. As with all of our deputations, we usually put the item on the agenda towards the end, which we don't expect you to hang around for. You will be notified of any decisions, but I will open it up to questions from council before you go. Councillor Stone.
Just a quick question. Is this simply a one-time ask because you couldn't fundraise because of COVID?
Well, we would like help on an ongoing basis, because normally the donations that we receive they go towards sort of the general vetting of the pets that we deal with. Our adoption fees don't quite cover what it would cost us to vet a cat all the way from when they come in. We do deworming, all their vaccinations, as well as spay, neuter, microchips. So a lot of the donations that we get go towards that, as well as any major medical issues that we come across with the pets that we take in. So when we are dealing with a colony or somebody that's got a couple of feral cats, we do ask for some money, but typically people, like if they have 5 cats that are hanging around their house, you know, asking for $500 is a big ask for someone that, you know, not my cat, not my problem. So we would be looking for sort of a yearly amount. I mean, $2,000 is probably a lot, you know, as we get more support from the communities. But just, it would be nice to sort of have that sort of cushion to be able to pull from when people aren't able to help financially.
Deputy Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Sue and Barb, for your presentation and for the work you're doing. I think it's really valuable. Quick question about the similar question to the previous councillor. The town of Bracebridge, when you mentioned they're giving you $2,000, is that one-time funding from them, or will that be a regular payment ongoing?
It's regular ongoing.
Okay.
Yeah, so every year they'll be looking for a report from us for how much we've spent, how many cats that we've dealt with. I think it's important to mention that the OSPCA, they don't actually have a trapping program either. So when a lot of the bylaw departments don't do any sort of trapping either. So when the OSPCA gets notification from, or not notification, but a request from somebody for help, typically they are referring them to us especially for that initial trapping help.
Thanks for that. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's a wonderful program. We used to have our own animal shelter here. We don't have that any longer. I think we used to contribute funds to it. We have a budget line item for the dog population, and I would certainly support seeing us do something on an ongoing basis for this program. Again, we will deal with that a little bit later on the agenda, but I am hopeful that you will get some support from Huntsville.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Council, we've got our last deputation, and that is Rec So I'm going to try the Zyterek.
That's pretty close.
Is it?
Thank you so much.
Welcome, Rick.
Thank you.
You're doing a presentation on Builders for Climate Action. Very timely. We just passed our climate emergency resolution on Monday night. So
yeah, and that's wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me here. I would like to share my screen to run through my presentation. I'm thinking this will do it. Does that work? Can everybody see the power, the big screen?
we certainly can.
Fabulous. So first of all, who I am and what's this all about. I am a member of Builders for Climate Action. We're a group of builders, engineers, architects, consultants, and we're all focused on building science and the environment and how we can do better for both. Everybody sort of knows that buildings contribute to climate crisis. We believe that with some rethinking, they can actually be a significant part of the solution to the climate crisis. And so the information that I'm going to share with you today, my screen doesn't seem to be moving. There we go. The information I'm sharing today is a summary from some major work in a master's thesis, mostly done by Chris Magwood, who's the founder of the Endeavour Center in Peterborough. He did some work around building science, the examination of carbon contribution to buildings. And that work is generally supported and endorsed by groups of architects, builders, engineers, people who focus on the environmental impact on buildings. And the federal government has looked at it, and they've provided funding to support the development of an assessment tool so that towns and cities, et cetera, could use some mechanism to measure the embodied carbon in buildings. So this idea that buildings contribute to the climate crisis, we kind of think about that normally as the heating and cooling, first of all. And let me back up a little bit. The US EPA says that buildings contribute through all aspects, getting the materials, putting them together, heating and cooling, and then dealing with the materials afterwards, contribute roughly 50% of the carbon that's essentially challenging our environment. Most major cities measure their own carbon, and they kind of divide that up into sources of that. City of Toronto says that 45% of their carbon comes from buildings. Most of us think about the carbon in buildings, and we think about fossil fuels and the heating and cooling of buildings, but left out of this typically are the emissions from the materials themselves. And that comes from the development of the materials, the finding it, resourcing, putting it together in the building, and then the disposition afterwards. And so these are kind of generally accepted numbers from the Science Council around the world. And these emissions, the ones around the materials, happen right now. So when you build a building, we've done with the emissions, and the emissions are in the environment. If we think about the heating and cooling costs, those are gradually contributing to the climate, and they happen over a long period of time. So this particular study looked at two kinds of buildings, a single family home and a multi-unit building, and then looked at that and the global warming potential, which is the measure of the upfront embodied carbon emissions, looking very primarily at not making up numbers, but looking at published numbers from the manufacturers of materials. So every material that you use in a building has to have an environmental product declaration that says, here's my material, here's the safety issues around exposure to people, the environment, and so on. And those can be anywhere from a few pages to 50 or 60 pages long, depending on the kind of material. And so Chris looked at over 350 materials, and then he looked at dividing those materials up in terms of how they're used in a building, those that are high in terms of their contribution to climate change, and then moving down the scale to those that are the best possible materials you could use. He looked at as well, if you built a home that was code compliant, versus building a home that was net zero ready. And so various forms of looking at the same data to understand what's really going on here. And so if we look at the detail of some of this, and we looked at that, the worst case, if you chose all of the materials that are harmful for the environment and put those into a building, they would be made up of things like this on the right-hand side, and then in the middle, the contribution to climate. So for example, the high embodied carbon concrete and XPS insulation, 14.7 tons of carbon into the atmosphere once you use the concrete in the building. And concrete, for example, is 7 to 10% of the global carbon emissions. So that in itself, if we can find a replacement or a better way of doing that, would be a significant impact on the environment. And so when you put all of these together, and you could see that you could create a building that created 212 tons of carbon before anybody opened the door and walked into the building. So that's from the sourcing of the material, the manufacturer, putting it in the building, the use, how do you use it, and so on. And then if you looked on the other side of the scale and you said, well, what if we used better materials that had a lower impact on the environment, and we'll produce the same building. It looks the same from the outside, it functions the same on the inside, but we use different materials. And so samples of those materials, for example, and you can see that these are actually negative numbers, meaning that they don't, the net value of using these materials to the environment is positive, meaning they store carbon in the building. And that storage is there for as long as the building is there. So you compare and you say, well, I could build a building that has a net emissions content of 212 tons of carbon, or if I simply change the material content, the materials I used to build the building, I could actually store 117 tons of carbon in the building, thus mitigating the impact on the environment, and in fact, storing that carbon for as long as the building is there. So if we look at that in another way and you say that, so how do we take carbon out of the atmosphere? Because we have to do that. That's typically done from trees, plants. So we plant trees, we get photosynthetic drawdown, which means we're taking carbon out of the atmosphere. We can harvest that tree or the product, do some manufacturing, and that's costing us some carbon to do the harvesting, the manufacturing, the transport, the construction. But then once you've done that, you've got that carbon in the building for as long as that building is there. And then your choice is maybe 50 or 100 or more years later, you can either reuse the materials, recycle it, or the worst case, it ends up in landfill. If you looked at the other kind of materials, the materials that are not so good for the environment, they also have a cycle where it costs you carbon to harvest, manufacture, transport, and construct the material. And then those materials and that carbon is now gone into the atmosphere before you actually open the door and include somebody as a homeowner or a tenant to the building. And so we see that we've created harmful emissions essentially on day one. If we use the harmful materials, if we use more positive materials, we can in fact store carbon for the life of the building. Now, people say, okay, so what have we got here? Well, we've got a choice of making the same building using high carbon materials or carbon sequestering materials. And the difference can be over 100 tons of carbon or more, depending on the size of the building and so on. And so this scale simply says, I start on the left-hand side with harmful emissions due to the material choices. I improve some of the materials as I move myself across that scale to the right-hand side, where I'm using the best materials that we know of today to produce the same quality of building. And in that case, we're storing carbon in the building. And then if we look at renovations as an example and say we replace a furnace with an air source heat pump so that we're, and do some insulation in a building, moving from code compliant and doing the same renovations on a code compliant house versus on a net zero ready house. And it turns out that doing that renovation might actually cost us carbon just because we've used harmful materials to do that renovation. So it's not always in the short-term best interest to do renovations, even if over the lifetime of the building that may save us in carbon, because the renovations may only provide a return over 50 or 100 years. So whereas the embodied carbon is something that we produce now, the day we make it. At scale, if you look at the bigger picture, and you look at in 2019, the total US low-rise construction of 241 million square meters, and then look at the cost of that, every year that 241 square meters of buildings get built using the harmful materials means that we would have to add, the US would have to add, in this case, 50 more million tons of carbon. That's 15 coal plants. The equivalent of that is up into the environment. If we do it using more carbon sequestering materials, we could in fact save 36 million tons of carbon, and essentially the equivalent of reducing or removing 10 coal plants. So it's a huge difference, particularly on a large scale. 90 tons of difference, 90 million tons difference in this particular case, looking at buildings in Muskoka. If you looked at just one particular building, that may mean 50 tons of carbon that you're reducing, and that could be the equivalent of maybe 13 cars taken off the road per year, just by moving from that left side to the right side in the choice of materials. So what does that mean? What it means is that we can actually ignore the information, or we could actually take some action. And there is a path that we could take to achieve zero carbon buildings, but somebody has to take some action. That would mean some form of transformation of the building industry. And everybody that, well, many people that I've talked to said, oh, you can't do that. That doesn't happen. People are set in their ways. But some people have done that. Duro Drummer, for example, has a program in place where they're encouraging the use of carbon storing and better environmentally friendly buildings. The recommendation here is to develop a program that said, let's stop building those high carbon buildings. Let's get a program that moves us on towards carbon storing. What could we do to do this? Well, there are lots of alternatives to do this. And one possibility is that a township could motivate builders, for example, or a city, a town, motivate builders to produce the same buildings using carbon storing materials versus the high carbon. One option could be in building fees, for example, permits and so on. Instead of charging everybody exactly the same amount for a building, just because it meets code, one possibility would be to either reduce the fees for carbon building and maybe raise the fees for a high carbon building. And there are ways to understand what that fee might be, and what's the difference between, how do you measure this? So there are tools to do that. And so this is one mechanism. Instead of charging everybody exactly that same fee, for example, in the dotted line, consider changing the fee structure or providing some motivation for builders and homeowners to choose those low carbon materials, and some form of motivation that would discourage people from using the high carbon materials, which means you could have a net zero impact on building fees and revenue to the city. This BEAM tool is something that Chris and Builders for Climate Action developed. The federal government provided some support for developing the tool, and it's ready to go now. And it's a tool that's online, and anybody can look at the building they're making and look at the materials they'd propose to put in that building and get a picture of the embodied carbon of all of the materials and a summary for the building. And so, for example, the township of Durham is using a tool, that's an early version of this tool, to say we're going to give a bonus to builders who use low carbon in their as materials and in their heating and cooling of the building. And they've had some success with that. And we're interested in having more people look at this. Chris is working with the City of Toronto. We're working with a variety of other townships. We've presented this material to a number of other cities and towns in the area. And what the only thing now is, in my view, is somebody deciding that they're actually going to take some action. And just a couple of charts here I've added on. This one is a recent court case in Australia where a group of children took a township to court because they were trying to develop more coal mines and more carbon. And this is part of the judgment that the Justice Marty Broomberg provided. And she said it will largely be inflicted, this problem we have will be inflicted by the inaction of this generation of adults in what might fairly be described as the greatest intergenerational injustice ever inflicted by one generation of humans upon the next. And what she's saying there is that essentially you and I, the council, we're all of roughly the age group. We have contributed to the problem by either our actions or our inaction. And it's our children and grandchildren that will suffer and will have to pay the price. And this court judgment actually found evidence and put a price on that carbon and the contribution, and said that the climate change is going to cost young people somewhere between $125,000 and $245,000 per person, around issues like property loss, reduced earnings, flooding, storms, things like that, and hospitalizations due to heat stress, a la Vancouver, for example, in the West that we're having today. So there's a financial cost sometimes to use low carbon materials, but there's a financial cost if we don't. And so it becomes a choice of, do we pay as the generation that is causing the problem, or do we leave the cost to our children and grandchildren? And so just as a reminder here, a few folks, Greta Thunberg, for example, who says, if you choose to fail, we will never forgive you. Well, I certainly don't want that on my head. And I've got 4 grandchildren. And the reason I'm even having this discussion is that when they're old enough to fully understand this, I don't want them to be looking at me saying, golly darn, I don't see anything you've done aside from composting. And so I'm trying to encourage the building industry and others to take some action that would help to mitigate the climate change. And so I'm asking council, in fact, to think about what are the barriers to move from that red to green, and find a way to minimize or eliminate the barriers, and help us to mitigate climate change. Again, if this is half of the carbon that's causing the climate crisis, it deserves, in my view, a fair bit of attention and thinking about how we can help to mitigate that. I guess I'm open for questions. Mayor, you're muted.
Thank you, Rick. If you'll stop sharing your screen, we will go to questions from council.
Let me figure out how to do this. Oh, there we go. Yep.
There we go. Okay, I see Councillor Thompson.
Great. Okay, thank you, your word. Yeah, Rick, a tremendously informative report, and thank you for that. Question I have is, and quite frankly, I'm astonished at the GHGs, I should say, that result from a standard single-family dwelling. That's quite a shocking learning curve for me. Question I have is when the comparisons were done, was there a comparison of costs for, let's say, for instance, in the building material aspect of things, but let's say the cost of rock sole insulation versus the insulation that is recommended in your report. Was there a cost comparison done with regards to that, and say versus building a standard house today at $400 per square foot versus what this change in materials would cost? Was that comparison done, Rick?
It wasn't done part of the study as part of the study, but it's essentially done every day by homeowners and builders as they look at buildings. And so I can tell you that there are a variety of builders who focus on green materials, and they win a significant number of competitive bids to build homes using appropriate materials versus the not so appropriate materials. There can be a small premium. We sometimes talk about a passive house, which is a performance standard for homes developed in Germany. That says if you insulate a home very well, pick the right kinds of windows, do the right kind of air sealing so we don't have drafty homes, then you can significantly reduce the heating and cooling costs of the home. And if you add use of proper materials, you can significantly reduce the carbon impact. And you may pay a small premium cost, but at the same time, the energy savings through that good insulation can pay for itself over a period of 10 or 15 years. And so one home example that I recall, and there's a builder in Halifax that does the analysis, and they have a variety of homes on their website that they build. And that set of homes, they advertise that you can save anywhere from $40,000 to $50,000, like enough money to pay for a mortgage worth $30,000 to $50,000, depending on the size of the home, by building to that standard. Now, you may pay a small premium up front, but if you're saving money over the longer term, the total cost of the home can be actually less. So it's a choice, and everybody isn't able to pick the environmental friendly choice, and many people need some kind of encouragement to do that. And so I guess the only thing I can say about cost is, like cellulose, for example, is very, very cheap. And so dense packing with cellulose can be comparable to foam for insulation value, and roughly the same price. But some of the other materials may have premiums.
Deputy Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Rick. I want to say it's how exciting it is to hear your presentation for a couple of reasons. One, I have a brother who's been working on building, working towards net zero housing as a builder for a number of years, and I think sometimes he's out in the wilderness. But so I will say, seeing your presentation is exciting because it's bringing it in the forefront to municipalities to say, all right, you've declared a climate action emergency, which the mayor said we did on Monday night. How do we get there? And I don't know if you know, but later on in the agenda today, we've got a first draft from staff of some new development standards. And so I look at, I think we're starting the conversation as to how to implement. And one of the things that I guess you made reference to the township of Drummer as a particularly good example of how they are in fact moving on trying to bring these building standards into play. And I'm wondering if we should be looking there. You mentioned a couple of other municipalities, and if there are some that you think are particularly helpful, I'd love to know which ones they are so that we can, if not reinvent the wheel, but if there are already policies in place that would assist us, then that would be really helpful.
Yeah, the one that in terms of size of community and so on that comes to mind as being most appropriate is the Duro Drummer, because they've just gone through this. But my recommendation would be have a look at what they've done, but consult with folks who have gone through the experience and have the building science experience and knowledge. I'd be happy to consult with the admin, for example, with your staff, if that was useful. I'd also, I'm sure that Chris Magwood would be delighted to make a contribution if that was useful in terms of his knowledge base.
That's great. Thanks for that. That's brilliant. I look forward to more work in this. So great.
Councillor Weeb.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, thank you, Rick, for this presentation. I know you and I have been back and forth talking about building science, and this really excites me. I think that as a council, I believe that we can start quickly and quite simply with a small education program, because I think what you've shown in some of these slides really is really, it's quite simple. It seems very elaborate and full of information, but it's actually really simple. And I think a lot of the builders, you know, given an extra printout or two with their permit, would actually learn quite a bit just by glancing at some of these figures. So I'm hoping that I was glad to hear that you say that you'd be willing to meet up with staff or whoever is appropriate to try and formulate a made in Huntsville kind of version of this, that as Councillor Aclock says, not to reinvent the wheel, but to take some of the simple information and pass it along. Because even if we don't put our thumb on the scale in terms of permit and dollar value, simple education on a lot of these items is going to be invaluable. So I'm really excited by it, and I'm really glad you're here. And I don't really have a question. I just want to say thanks, and I'm just glad that we can hopefully take the next steps and keep it simple and keep the education piece of this at the forefront. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Weeb. The education piece, of course, costs us nothing. It's something we can do to help our building community maybe take the step in the right direction. And I appreciate your suggestion about incentives being a difference in building fees. Certainly something we can look at. I guess my one question, Rick, is are you aware if there are any incentive programs at either the provincial or federal level, you know, such as there's always programs out there from Hydro about switching out your windows and things like that. Is there a program that addresses what you presented to us today at any other level of government?
Not that I'm aware of. I know that individually there are some grants. So for example, Duro Drummer did get a grant to help them in that rebate program that they provided. There are periodically federal grants targeted at municipalities for things like improving in their environmental impact. So they come and they go. I know that with a little research and calls to folks in the federal government, other things could be identified possibly, but I don't specifically know of, you know, as a homeowner or a builder, a way that you can apply and say, okay, I'm going to make this home green. I'm going to hit a high point on my beam tool score and do a great job. What can you do for me? I don't know of a program that does that.
Okay, thanks for that. Sorry, Councillor Armour, I missed you.
That's all right, Your Worship. Just had a quick question. I believe, Rick, do you not live in a straw-built home?
Actually, I do.
You do? Okay.
It's a renovation my daughter did about 10, 12 years ago.
Right. So I don't know if you can answer this. Can you give me an example of any changes in heating costs? Because I believe you live in Baysville, right? So pretty much the same typical weather we have.
I do. And my heating costs and cooling are very low. And in fact, the story I relate to better is that when it's in the wintertime, when it's 20 or 30 or 40 below, I don't have any heating and cooling on overnight. I will use a little bit of heating during the daytime. The walls are very thick and well insulated. and I may lose a degree overnight when it's minus 30 outside with no heating, cooling going on at all. And so on a very hot day, the building is reasonably comfortable and cool inside. On a cool day, it is warm and comfortable inside because of the energy stored in the building itself. That's particular to straw bale, but it's also relates to cellulose. You know, if you use enough cellulose or other environmentally friendly materials, you can have a similar kind of effect.
Okay, Rick, thank you so much for that. Hopefully we will be in contact as we work forward to maybe try to implement some of this.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much again for having me, and I'd be delighted to talk further whenever you're ready to do that.
Okay, thanks so much.
Okay, bye now.
Thank you. Council, how about a quick 5-minute bio break? And it's 10:20 and we'll be back at 10:25. Okay, Madam Clerk, if you can hear me, I think we can resume. And we have most everybody returning.
Mayor Terziano, if you just let me check for a second to make sure that Lisa Spalnick has taken the screen down for us.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, we're all good. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks for that. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Armour and seconded by Councillor Schumacher. It is recommended that the Budget and Financial Controls Policy, Budget Financial 21, attached to Schedule A to Report Corp 2021-48 be repealed and replaced, and further that Resolution 15420 ratified by Council on May 27, 2020 be rescinded. Reva, do you want to highlight this report? And I know I have an amendment already to that motion, but I'll let you go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you, Madam Chair. So in October of 2019, the Budget and Financial Controls Policy was approved by Council. Since then, we've had two budgets passed, 2020 and 2021. So throughout the budget processes for both of those years, staff did note several areas of the policy where further clarity would be beneficial. So the finance team performed a review of the entire policy. So the main issue was that some areas were a little more ambiguous than others, which could potentially be interpreted in more than one way. So our goal with these amendments is to minimize areas where that might happen and to provide for greater objectivity in the application of the policy. So I'm just going to walk through some of the main amendments that are proposed throughout this policy. So the first is the addition of a few new definitions, which were included in the 2021 budget book. So things like non-annual recurring items, one-time items, and council initiatives. So I think it's important to note that council initiatives are the initial additional operating or capital costs brought forward from council or committee for consideration in the budget. The future costs related to those initiatives are included in the base level budget going forward. I think it's also important to note that these also only relate to items brought forward after the draft budget's been presented. So initiatives brought forward throughout the year are to be included in the base level budget. One of the other amendments is the specification of which CPI measure to be used. So in the May 2021 General Committee meeting, a staff report was brought forward and approved to use CPI trim. So that now is throughout this Budget and Financial Controls Policy to specifically outline that that's the measure to be used. So the next is an expansion of section 3.1, which is the operating budget and business plan preparation. So that's just to elaborate on how this strategic plan ties to the business process. The next amendment is in section 3.5, and that relates to the operating budget principles. So there are a couple amendments within this section. The first is to provide specific guidance related to user fee increases. So rather than including kind of a subjective 2% increase annually, which has been an assumed practice in the past, staff felt that it would be a much more objective approach to tie these increases to CPI. To better account for the increase in costs related to the services being provided. So the user fee increase in practice has not been formally documented in a policy to this point, so that's why we've added it into here. So the second amendment to this section is to provide specific guidance related to reduction in debenture payments. So essentially any reductions in debenture payments from the previous year will be added as an increase in funding to capital. So this has been an assumed practice in the past, but hasn't really been formally documented in a policy to this point, which is again why we've included it here. So there's also an amendment in section 4, which is the capital budget development. And this is an amendment to clearly define guidance on how to account for trade-ins. So specifically identifying that we're separating a trade-in from the actual purchase of a capital asset when we're developing our capital plan. So again, this has been done in practice, but we wanted to specifically outline this in the policy, that they're two separate things. Section 5 relates to tax rate changes, and this proposed amendment in this section specifically outlines that the tax rate change presented in the draft budget is exclusive of those council initiatives, and that any tax rate changes resulting from council initiatives will be shown separately. So those council initiatives are things brought forward after the draft budget has been presented. So in the responsibilities section, staff have added a CAO's responsibilities piece, and this relates to staff changes throughout the year. So these changes are all in accordance with the CAO bylaw, but staff wanted to tie these responsibilities that are already in that bylaw to specifically to what that means for the budget. So the basic premise here is that the CAO is able to approve changes in staffing during any given year, as long as a few conditions are met. So the first condition being either the total salaries, wages, and benefits remains within the corporate-wide budget, or there's no negative net levy impact. So for example, if a staffing change results in increased revenue, the total SWB might be over the corporate-wide budget, but that's offset by revenue. So there's no net levy impact or negative net levy impact for that staff addition. The other condition that has to be met is it can't result in an increase to next year's budget. So we can't be increasing the levy for a subsequent budget by making these staffing changes throughout the year. So the next main amendment is the addition of section 7.3, and that relates to pooled capital projects. So this is with respect to pooled tangible capital asset projects. So things like computer hardware, fire equipment, those kinds of things. So these assets are really only replaced when they fail, so on an as-needed basis. But when we budget for them, we can only estimate which items might fail throughout the year based on their age and their conditions. So we use the estimated replacement costs and the asset conditions to predict how much money we need to budget for each of these specific pools. So this may or may not end up being the case throughout the year because the assets are only replaced as they fail. So this section allows us to switch the funding for pooled assets between the different pooled projects. So for an example, between computer hardware and printers. And that's based on what needs to be replaced throughout the year. So this can only be done within a department. It can't be, if we underspend in computer hardware, we can't buy more fire equipment, for example. It needs to be done within that department. So this will ensure that we have the most effective use of the pooled funding, and that the assets are only being replaced when necessary. So again, the funds would only be interchangeable within each department. And the last change relates to a change in the reporting timeline for capital forecasts to be more in line with our operating forecasts. So currently it says 30 days after a quarter end, and we're proposing 60 days after each quarter. So the intention of this is that the forecast will be brought forward the second month following the quarter end. So for Q2, which ends in June, the forecast would be presented in August. For Q3, which ends in September, that would be presented in November. So this allows for the full capital and operating forecast to be brought forward together, which gives you a more fulsome picture of what's going on at that quarter. And it allows us enough time after each quarter to make sure that the actual costs and the revenues are reported accurately. Providing a forecast within 30 days of the quarter end may result in inaccurate actual numbers in that forecast. So that's kind of in a nutshell all of the proposed amendments in this policy. So I'm available for questions.
Okay, Council, I also have a resolution moved by the Chair of Finance, Councillor Withey, and I need a seconder for that, which outlines a couple more changes. Can I get a seconder? Deputy Mayor Alcott, thank you. I'll read it. This is the motion to amend. It is recommended that the words after Schedule A be struck out and replaced with as amended to Report Corp 2021-48 be repealed and replaced with the following changes. Section 2.2, the word new added before council initiatives. Section 3.55, the words or 2%, whichever is higher, be added to the CPI trim. Section 5.3, the word new be added before both references to council initiatives, and the words brought forward after the draft budget is presented be included after is inclusive of any council initiatives. Section 6.5.4, the following word be struck out if the staffing is generally offset by revenue generated and replaced with the following, and in accordance with the CAO bylaw. And the following struck out the addition of a full-time staff member that is not offset by ongoing savings. And 3, the following added as a last bullet point, the CAO will seek efficiencies when reviewing changes in staffing levels and will decrease salary, wages, and benefits while maintaining existing service levels where possible. And finally, section 7.6.2, strike through the wording or around 60 days and add the second month before the following period end. Councillor Withey, do you want to speak to those changes and how we got to those?
Sure, thank you, Your Worship. You and I met with Reva and Julia and went through this line by line, and sort of a lot of these changes are just really adding clarity to what the meanings really are. Of course, adding the line that the CAO will seek efficiencies to also include staffing decreases wherever possible, which we thought was important. The rest, yeah, is just sort of clarification and clarity.
Okay. Are there any questions specifically on the amendment? And I guess I should ask, does council want to actually see that amendment on the screen, or are you fine with it? Okay. All in favor of the amendment? And that carries. I see a yellow hand, Councillor Fitzgerald. Thank you. So the main motion as amended, are there any questions, comments, or concerns about the main motion as amended? And that would be on the entire report. Seeing none, all in favor of the main motion as amended? And that as well carries. Thanks for that, Reva. Lots of changes in that report, and we're just going to move right into another one. Hopefully not as many changes. Moved by Councillor Stone, seconded by Councillor Withey. It is recommended that the cash disbursement policy, budget financial 13, attached to Schedule A to Report Corp 2021-50 be repealed and replaced, and further that motion GC 19116 ratified by Council on December 20th, 2016 be rescinded. Reva?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So with the approval of the new procurement policy in April of this year, as well as the fact that the cash disbursements policy hadn't actually been amended since 2016, the finance team did undertake a review of this policy because it really just hadn't been changed in a while. So the main amendments for this one, the formatting has been changed for consistency with our newer financial policies. We've also significantly elaborated the responsibilities section. And we've elaborated on the processes for check disbursements, electronic funds transfers, so EFTs, and pre-authorized payments, or PAPs, to include the electronic approval of invoices, and specifically what is to be reviewed and by who. So the main change with this policy is the approval requirements for EFTs. So previously, a council signing authority was required to approve EFTs over $100,000. So since all invoices are actually approved in accordance with the procurement policy authorization levels, which require council signing authority to sign off on certain invoices over a certain threshold. The finance team felt that this was actually evidence of the approval for payment as well. You know, a council signing authority wouldn't sign off on an invoice that they didn't expect to be paid. Essentially what this means that as long as an invoice is approved by a council signing authority, it's effectively been approved for payment as well. And the specific authorization of the EFT itself is not specifically required. So I did also want to note that we haven't changed or we're not proposing to change the signing requirements for checks. So although invoices are approved in accordance with the procurement policy, as I mentioned with the EFTs, this payment method is generally more susceptible to fraud. So in order to mitigate that potential for fraud, we're proposing to keep the check signing authorization level consistent with the existing policy. So anything over $100,000 needs to be manually signed by a council signing authority as well as a staff signing authority. So that's what the existing policy says. So I think it's really important to note here that these changes do not reduce the level of controls that we have over the cash disbursements process. So, you know, it won't affect things like the audit and that kind of stuff. So that's all I had for that one. I'm available for questions.
Questions, council? I just have one. I suppose if an invoice is signed off for payment but isn't required to be signed off for the EFT transfer, where's the check and balance that the EFT transfer is inputted in as the same amount as the invoice?
So included in the responsibilities section, there is specific treasurer responsibilities. So every week when the EFTs go forward, the AP clerk prepares the EFTs and prepares a listing. So the treasurer or the deputy treasurer goes through the listing and essentially we need to sign off on and approve the payment of that EFT. Specifically on each and every single invoice. So we need to make sure that the authorization of the invoice was there, that the amount agrees to the EFT listing, that the dates are all correct, that the account coding in our accounting software is all correct. And all of that is outlined in the treasurer responsibility section. We also need to sign off once the AP clerk sends the EFT to the bank, there's a dual authentication there as well. So the treasurer needs to go in and authorize that, yes, this amount agrees to the EFT listing that we've previously approved in our system. So there's actually quite a bit of checks and balances. Every week we need to look at every single invoice and sign off on each individual invoice to make sure that all of the amounts are correct. And there's quite a bit of controls over the process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, council, all in favor? And that carries. I have a motion moved by Councillor Withey, seconded by Councillor Wiebe. It is recommended that the fraud prevention policy budget financial 22 attached to Schedule A to Corp 2021-50 be repealed and replaced. And further, that motion 5219 ratified by council on September 20th, 2019 be rescinded. Reva.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in accordance with the existing fraud policy, the finance team has been developing a more formalized fraud awareness education program for all of staff. So because of this, we did review the underlying policies and felt that further clarity was needed in certain areas. So the proposed amendments, again, there's some reformatting to be consistent with other financial policies. But the main proposed amendment here is elaborating and clarifying the responsibilities with respect to reporting and fraud investigations. So, you know, essentially if a staff suspects fraud, who are they supposed to relate to, or who are they supposed to report to, and who's in charge of those investigations? So, you know, that's essentially the gist of the proposed amendments in this policy. So again, I'm available for questions.
Okay, and I also have an amendment for this policy moved by Councillor Withey, and I need a seconder again for that. Councillor Stone. And the amendment reads, it is recommended that the words after Schedule A be struck out and replaced with as amended to Corp 2021-50 be repealed and replaced with the following change, section 5.6.1. The following wording, including notifying the mayor's office of any such allegations of the CAO, be added after the Human Resource Department has had the primary responsibility for the management and coordination of fraud investigations that involve the CAO. Councillor Withey?
Thank you, Worship. Again, as a result of our line-by-line meeting, just noted that as the CAO is the only employee of council, I felt, or we felt it was appropriate that the mayor's office be informed if there is any fraud suspected by the CAO.
Questions on the amendment? All in favor of the amendment? That carries. And then the main motion is amended. Moved by Councillor Withey and seconded by Councillor Wiebe. All in favor of the main motion as amended? That carries. Madam Clerk, I have one question because I just noticed in our last resolution on the cash disbursement policy, the resolution actually refers to the wrong report. Is there anything I need to do about that right now? It refers to report 2021-50 and it's actually 2021-51.
That's just administrative error. If you can just put the 51 instead of 50, that would be great.
Well, I love marking up the motions. Okay. Thanks, Reeve. I think that's it for you. And we're moving on to a report on, Jessica, a report on the road assumption, a road purchase. Moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Councillor Thompson. It is recommended that application RC 04-2021 HTE be approved in accordance with the OSRA policy. Conditional on the applicant pay all survey and legal associated expenses. The sale price for the land proposed to be closed be in accordance with the fees and charges bylaws amended. A survey and duplicate be provided showing the road allowance as a specific part in the plan. A registered transfer deed of land for the road allowance be filed with the municipality within 1 year from the date of the motion approving the application, or the motion will be considered null and void, and a new application will be required. That any utility plant located on the property proposed to be closed be given an easement. The road allowance be hereby declared a surplus to the town's needs. The portion of the road allowance being closed merge in title with Part Lot 20 Concession 1 listed. The mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the necessary documentation pertaining to the closure and sale of said road allowance. These usually happen at planning. Jessica, will you explain to us why it's happening here and maybe go over any highlights of the report?
Thank you, Mayor Terziano. Yes, so these applications used to be processed through planning, and I'm now processing them. So I'm bringing this report forward to general. This application is regarding an original road allowance abutting 2155 Aspidon Road. It's approximately 1.25 hectares between Old Aspidon Road and McDermott Road. In accordance with the policy, the application was circulated to internal departments for comments or concerns. No concerns were received. Staff recommend approval of the application as it meets the required criteria, being that the applicant owns the land abutting the road allowance. No landowners are being deprived of their sole vehicular access, and the closure does not conflict with any of the town's official plans, policies, or procedures. The applicant's required to circulate abutting landowners, and in that circulation, 2 objections were received from 82 Old Aspidon Road and 88 Old Aspidon Road. The objections that were presented were that the closure of the road allowance would, for 82 Aspidon Road, his objections were it would landlock the back portion of his property. He also said that he walks back to that road allowance and uses it to walk to another road allowance to get to Skeleton Lake Beach, and that it will affect the property value. The response to those concerns are that the policy requires that no owners will be deprived of their sole vehicular access, which they won't. And the road allowance leading to Skeleton Lake will remain accessible from McDermott Road. 88 Old Aspidin again said it would inhibit their access to the rear of their property. It would decrease the property values, and they would like it open for access for hydro. And the response to those concerns are again the vehicular access, and all of these applications are circulated to the necessary utilities, including hydro. So if any access easements were required, hydro would have an opportunity to make that request. I'm open for questions.
Councillor Stone.
Yeah, so without the public process, I thought when we gave staff the ability to okay these applications, if there was any concerns from neighboring property owners, it would go to planning, which I think is the appropriate process. And so I can vote in favor of this without hearing from the public.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Jessica, for your presentation. My comments are sort of along the same lines as Councillor Stone. I think that when there is an objection, and I appreciate the response, that it sounds like the objections raised are unfounded in the sense that their access still is maintained. But I have to say, I read the note and it wasn't clear to me how that was the case, just because I couldn't tell from the map that was included. So there's part of me that I feel like I'm missing this public aspect of this file as well. So I don't know what to do with that, because I'm sure this has been well thought out. I don't know the answer to whether I can support it or not. I don't know.
I wonder if, I know that we have the Town of Huntsville mapping system available to be put up, and I just wonder, before we continue on, can we put it up and show the property in question, show 82 and 88 Old Aspidin, Dermott Road, and Skeleton Lake within the map so that we get a better visual of this?
Yes, I will share my screen.
Thanks, Jessica. I'll come back for more questions, Council. Let's just have a quick look first.
Okay, can everyone see my screen here?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the road allowance. This is 2155 Old or Aspidin, sorry. This is the road allowance here. And the two objectors are in this location. McDermott Road is here. And Skeleton Lake is approximately 6 kilometers over here. There is a beach location in this area.
Can you just zoom that back out a bit and just highlight the objecting properties for us?
Yes. Here, 82.
Okay.
And 88. Side-by-side owners.
Okay. And with that road allowance closed, where their access is up at the top there, is that?
Their access
correct?
is along, yeah, along here on Old Aspidin.
Old Aspidin.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Council, if there's any questions while the map's still up that it would be helpful, go ahead and shout out and I'll recognize you. Otherwise, we'll take the map down and go back to questions.
I'll have a question, Your Worship.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Reeve.
Well, thank you. So in looking at this map, I tend to agree with the objectors in that, right where that cursor is, that does in fact block public access, let's say, or access down this road allowance to the left to water. I know that I always think of if I were living there and I could walk down a public space that was that led to water, I would do it as often as possible. So I do think that declaring it surplus beyond that point may be an error on our part. So I'm not prepared to I'm not prepared to support this at this time.
Okay, Jessica, if you'll stop sharing your screen now, just so I can see council, and I see Councillor Fitzgerald. Go ahead, please. Councillor Fitzgerald, are you there?
Sorry, I was having difficulties with the screen pop up there. I tend to agree with Councillor Stone's comments that maybe there was some public opposition to this, and I definitely agree with Councillor Wiebe that if we are taking away people's access where they don't have to go on a municipal road, so whether it be they access that by their four-wheeler or they walk or ride their mountain bikes, that they should be able to maintain that access to the water. So I agree with Councillor Wiebe's comments and that I can't support this.
Councillor Armour.
Thank you, Worship. I also agree, but I'm just curious, does anybody know what that road allowance is like for accessing the water? Like, I was wondering, is it foot traffic, bicycle traffic, or four-wheeler traffic, or is it not? Is there swamps that you actually have to go around through there? So I'm just curious what the landscape's like.
Jessica?
My understanding is that it is quite wooded. That's the extent of my knowledge on there.
Councillor Thompson.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I would like to see, I think, a better clarification. I couldn't really understand exactly where the properties were and so on and so forth with what we saw from Jessica there. So I'd like to see I guess a clearer map or whatever with highlights and crossbars or, crosses, that kind of thing, crosshatches, whatever, to show the affected properties and so on and so forth. I just didn't get a clear picture from that presentation.
Okay, I think, Council, what I'm hearing is we can amend this to send it to planning for a public meeting, or we can postpone this for another month and get more clarity. I guess it's where you would like to deal with it, at planning, which gives the public a chance to weigh in, or to get more information and deal with it. Deputy Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think I'd prefer to have it sent back to planning, either or it's going to be denied today. I wouldn't support it either. But I think that if you send it back to planning, we can ask perhaps some of the issues around justification as to why the applicant wants to close the road and all of that stuff as well. So and there could be a public airing. So I think if we were sending it somewhere, that's where I would send it.
Okay, I see the clerk clapping, and I think it probably means she's raising her hand. And I also see the Director of Development Services on screen. So who wants to go first? Tanya?
Thank you, Mayor Terziano. So I think there's some confusion here because the road allowance stuff is no longer with planning, and there's no public hearing portion with planning in the regards to these. I'm going to, if I can, Mayor Terziano, defer to Kirsten, and she can explain a little further than that, because they've just handed all this process over to us. So
sounds like a good idea. Director?
Thank you, Chair Terziano, the road allowance closures and shore road allowance closure process is not, there's never been a public meeting component. The applications were considered at planning committee until, because planning held responsibility for those processes at the time, but they were not, they were dealt with more along the same lines as a site plan, where there isn't an opportunity for the public to provide comment. In this instance, as the neighbors are requested to provide a sign off and they didn't, the only other public opportunity for consideration is when, if it's approved by council, when the bylaw is finally ready to be passed, there is an opportunity for the public to provide comment again at that point, but it's never through a public meeting process, if that helps.
That helps tremendously. I won't suggest we send this back to planning. I think Councillor Fitzgerald was next.
I thank you, Chair Terziano. I would suggest that we make a motion to not approve this application. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Weeb.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I don't know yet why, what the purpose is, as Councillor Alcock mentioned, of a large portion of land closing up a little strip, and what it's going to be used for. As it stands, I still stand by my earlier comments that we're potentially blocking off public access to water through this process. So I'm still in objection.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think Councillor Armour was ahead of me, but that I'll be brief. I appreciate the comments about we don't have public input on these files, but as Councillor Weeb just said, the difference, and Jessica, you did a great job. I thank you for your report. Having said that, I think if it comes to planning, and maybe we need to rethink when we have objections or something, then we look at if there's a different lens that we're looking at an application like this versus at planning versus at general. To exactly what Councillor Weeb just said, I never really got, when I read the report, I don't understand what the applicant's intent was for the need for the acquisition. And I never got a sense when I looked at the note, either through the graphics or the explanation as to really how the objectors' needs were being met, and other than they could access through the front part of their portion, which really didn't answer their objection, right or wrong. It's looking at it through a planning lens versus a general committee lens. So I'm right now, as it stands, I won't vote in favor of this application.
Jessica, do you want to answer the question as to the applicant's desire to acquire this land or the reason?
Yeah, so the applicant indicated to me that they just wanted to keep it green space, and that was their desire to acquire it. And we do have a policy, the original road allowance and shore road allowance closure policy, which allows residents to apply to purchase these types of properties.
Thanks for that. Councillor Armour.
Thank you, Worship. And I just wanted to know, we had two people oppose this. I'm just wondering if the other residents who back onto this property, did they sign off on it or did they just not respond at all?
Jessica?
Not all of the residents signed off. Some residents acknowledged that they weren't going to sign but didn't submit a formal objection. Some residents did sign and some residents were unresponsive, but the applicant made the attempts.
Councillor
Have a follow-up?
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Hang on. Yeah, go ahead with your follow-up.
So I'm not sure if I can follow up with this, but I'm just curious. So can the applicant come back after if we turn this down and apply to only close a portion up to those residents and leave the other area open?
Jessica?
Perhaps I would defer to Director Maxwell on that one. I believe that they can, but I haven't had that scenario yet.
Kirsten?
Thank
Can
you.
they swap up and close a portion of the road?
They could. The town could choose to approve just a portion of the road allowance being closed. It would totally be up to council's discretion at that point.
Okay. Councillor Fitzgerald?
Thank you, Chair. If the applicant's desire is to maintain it as green space, why are they willing to spend the $75,000 to purchase it when currently the town is maintaining it as green space? And I would endeavor to think that we will continue to do that. It doesn't sound right to me. So, like I said before, I'm not going to support this.
Councillor Armour, last word to you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm just saying, in the report, it specifies he wants to use it. He wants to use it for M&R forestry program. So there could be some logging taking place.
Okay, Council, I think I know somebody was suggesting a resolution to deny this, but I think just not passing this resolution, if there's not enough in favor, will accomplish that in itself. So we have the resolution to approve it, and I'm going to call a question. All in favor? Opposed? And that is defeated. Thank you. Thanks, Jessica. I know you have another one. So we have a road allowance closure fees follow-up for information only. But Jessica, do you want to highlight something in that?
Thank you, Mayor Terziano. So this report is in response to the report that I brought last month. Staff were asked to look into the use of an appraisal over the square meter valuation. I determined that the use of an appraisal came in 2012. A discussion took place at committee regarding the use of appraisals, and committee decided that for the closure of a larger road allowance, not the shore road allowances, the applicant could pay the town an amount established by an appraisal based on market value rather than the price per square meter, and the appraisal would have to be paid by the applicant. Staff reviewed the applications received over the past 5 years to determine how often this is being used. And out of the 17 applications, only 1 used the price per square meter and 10 appraisals were used. I have a few examples in the report of the difference in value, but I just wanted to highlight 2. One where the square meter was 4,756. The price would be 28,500 approximately, and the appraised value was 6,000. A similar square meter property was 4,000. It would be around 24,000, and the appraised value was at 11,000. So in keeping with the original committee decision, the appraisal provides for a more feasible purchase price for applicants looking to purchase a large original road allowance. And I'm open for questions.
Questions, Council? Councillor Stone.
So it appears to get an appraisal, like we said before, it seems like a steal. Why wouldn't I get an appraisal? Perhaps we're out of whack with the amount that we're charging right now. So shouldn't we lower our price per square meter and try and have something more reasonable so that these people aren't grabbing these sometimes large tracts of land for next to nothing?
Councillor Weeb, I think you also had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So I kind of brought this up at the last meeting, and I hear what Councillor Stone's saying. It's a tough one for me, actually, now that I really start to dig into some of the numbers and to really decide how something is valued. I also learned that, or I do know that you can't, some of the comments came last time with, you can't simply get sort of a phony appraisal because of the industry is regulated. So I believe that might be I think we might have, I think I'm kind of leaning towards leaving it as is, but I'm certainly open to exploring if maybe our, like Councillor Stone said, if our price per is so far out of whack. Because as it is now, I surmise to believe that it would be totally unfair for so many people if we altered this plan and went to price per meter at $6, because as you can see on the chart, it would just make it completely unwieldy for people to do a very simple process. So I'm kind of inclined to keep it kind of as is.
Councillor Thompson.
Was that me, Your Worship?
Yes.
Was that me?
Yes. Yes,
the audio is
Councillor
breaking
Thompson.
up here, so I'm not sure whether you.
Yeah, go ahead,
Okay,
Councillor
thank you.
Thompson.
Thank you. I said my audio was breaking up, so I wasn't sure whether I'd been acknowledged enough. The question I have for Jessica, the two examples you used where appraisals were used, what year were those done? And the reason I asked that is because the difference between what vacant land was selling for even 2 years ago versus today is significantly different. And I'm just wondering what the dates were, what years those two appraisals were done. If you could let us know that.
Jessica?
Okay, sorry, I don't have that just in front of me, but they were within the applications that I reviewed in the last 5 years.
That's actually a good point, though, Councillor Thompson. And the appraisal of land is higher today, so maybe raising the square meter price does make sense. Anyways, at this point, that one was for information. So if council wants further exploration on that, we will need to provide direction. And if you're good to leave it for now, we're going to move on to the next report. So I open it up to you. All right. Jessica, I think you have one more, and that was the report that was postponed from last month on the license of occupation, shore road allowance, and road closure fees. And this one has a resolution, which I will read, moved by Councillor Schumacher, seconded by Deputy Mayor Alcock. It is recommended that committee approve the following changes to the town's fees and charge bylaw. License of occupation, create a new fee of $100 for the provision of conditional approval letters. Amend the utility fee to $1,100 for the term of the license. Original road allowance increased to $7.50 per square meter or appraisal at the sole expense of the applicant, conducted by an appraiser whose professional license is satisfactory to the director or designate. And further that the following proceeds and annual fees be allocated as follows. Shore road allowance closing fees to Parks Capital, license of occupation fees to Parks Capital, dock lease annual fees, Parks Capital, and sale of surplus land to Town Capital Reserve. Jessica, highlights or?
I won't provide any further highlights on that one as we went over it last month, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you for that. Questions, council? All in favor? All right, and that carries. A couple of months later, but we got that one done. All right, I have next on my list, Margaret has a report on a road name list bylaw. And I have a resolution moved by Councillor Weep and seconded by Councillor Withey. It's recommended that committee approves the road name list attached to Schedule A to Report Corp 2021-54, and further that the draft road name list bylaw be forwarded to council for approval. Margaret?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you. The report is fairly straightforward, and the lengthy attached list is there. I do want to point out a few small corrections that were pointed out to myself and I was able to make. So I'll just list some of those off here. The first set are some road names that are existing on the list as town, as well as a private portion. So in my formatting of the report, the private portion is not showing on the current list. So I'm going to rhyme those off now. That'll be Beach Road private, Beaver Meadow private, Clearwater Lake private, Deerhurst Drive private, Swallowdale Road private, Springfield Road private, and Town Line Road East private. There was one other correction, Stevenson Road 1 East, there's a district portion. And there was one removed, North Down Street private. That was a small correction staff and myself noted a month or so ago. And Middle Woods Lane is a proposed road that got missed on the list currently. So that'll be added as a proposed name. I'll make those corrections on the list prior to going to council in July. We also will add to the bylaw that will repeal a bylaw number 95-52. That's an old bylaw from 1995 in the era when civic addressing was first coming into effect, and that named various streets. So we thought to clean things up, have a nice consolidated list from today moving forward. That would be a great choice to do that as well. So again, it's a great management tool. It's a starting point that I'll be using for road naming and civic addressing as we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Weeb.
Thank you, Worship. Just really quick. So who came up with Hollywood Drive? And is there any chance they would maybe reconsider it?
Margaret, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. That is a road as well as Markborough. Hollywood Drive and Markborough went together a couple of years ago off the top of my head. It's part of a subdivision plan in the south end of Huntsville. It was brought to council and committee a few years ago for those proposed road names. And it was passed at that time. So we do have a bylaw approving those road names. So I'm not sure how we could question or change that, but I'm sure there could be a process if needed. My next approach in the coming month will be a new road naming policy and procedure, talking about how to name roads and how not to name roads. Perhaps some of those questions, concerns, ideas, I think that would be a great area to talk about some of those.
Thanks, Margaret. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Margaret, with regards to Springfield Road, did I hear you say that it's listed as a town road, but it should be a private road?
Go ahead, Margaret.
Sure, thank you. I listed that one because there's really two sections of Springfield, as well as a number of other roads. There's a segment of Springfield running north and south that is town owned. When Springfield, I say, veers off to the east, it then becomes private. So in this list, I've indicated both the town owned segment as well as a private segment.
Yes, thank you for that. I was part of the process in having that town portion assumed by the town a number of years ago. But so I just wanted clarification on that. That's what I thought. Probably that's what you meant by that. So.
Okay, all in favor of the resolution? And that carries. Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you.
All right, we're moving on to operations. Colleen McDonald, you have the results of the Clark Crescent Tennis Court Survey. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Armour, seconded by Councillor Thompson. It's recommended that staff be directed to perform significant tree removal at Clark Crescent Park, 21 Spring Creek Lane, in order to create a new multi-use space. And further, that staff be directed to enter an item in the 2022 budget in the amount of $260,000 to be considered by council during the budget process for the renovation and rebuild of tennis and multi-purpose courts at this location. And further, that staff be directed to apply for funding to support this 2022 project. Colleen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, back in March, I was before you with this topic, and as directed during that meeting, we did do the public consultation through survey and quick poll. The results are captured here, a snapshot of the results, we've given some options. The proposed option is that we create a multi-use space there, so we could incorporate tennis, pickleball, basketball, all on that one surface. And in order to do that, we'd of course do some tree removal. So I'm happy to report that we have made application for some funding for that. Director Mackenzie filed that application last week. So hopefully we're successful there, but until we learn about that, we'll certainly, if approved by council, we would be putting that item in the amount of $260,000 into the budget process for council consideration this fall.
Okay, questions, council? No, wow. All in favor? And that carries. Colleen, did you ever get off lucky there? No questions. New business, a fire department report for information. Chief Collins. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. Nice to be here again to bring a quarterly report. Just in the interest of time, I know your meeting's running fairly long. I thought the best thing to do would be to just hit the real high spots of my report. It's been there for you to read. A couple things that I just wanted to point out. In terms of our call statistics, things are moving back to, we had a bit of a spike in calls as was the case across the province, and we largely wrote that off to people's behaviors around the pandemic and staying home a lot and learning how to cook again safely and things like that. But we've seen so far this year that, and particularly in the first quarter, that call volumes are returning to more normal pre-COVID levels, which is good. Our volumes were down almost 10% year over year, so that was a good sign. In terms of training, we have had to adjust the way we train, but we are continuing to deliver all the required training that we need to keep our people competent and safe as they're doing this job. We have changed things around, so we have reduced our class sizes. We're taking all the precautions with social distancing and being safe in that way, but we have been able to deliver a very good training program. One of the highlights of training was we were able to do a ice and water rescue technician training program, which we developed in-house. We delivered it over a number of weekends here in Huntsville, and we did something similar in Lake of Bays as well. That was a fairly big deal, and it was good to get our people trained to that level. Fire prevention and public education, we've been very curtailed again by the restrictions around the pandemic. We took a few novel approaches to these things. We've been doing a lot of social media, and our fire prevention people actually developed some videos that we were able to share with the schools and other groups as they were doing remote learning and doing things through technology. We were able to provide some videos, which was kind of an interesting approach, and we'll probably continue to do that going forward. Fire prevention inspections, we've been, again, not able to do our regular level of inspections, but one of the things that prevention has done is using a technology solution, which we were able to purchase through one of the provincial grant programs. It allows inspectors to do remote or virtual inspections rather than going into the facility. And this was particularly important with the vulnerable occupancy, long-term care facilities, hospitals, things like that, where we really were not able to get in. We have now been able to do some form of inspection, and we look forward to getting back to normal in that regard as the restrictions start to lift. So that's just sort of a real quick overview, and I'm open to any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Rob. I'll go to questions. Councillor Thompson. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Chief Rob. Rob, with regards to the training facility, I know that the town, at least I believe the town of Gravenhurst and Bracebridge both have petitioned the province with regards to the Ontario Fire College in Gravenhurst being closed. And I'm just wondering, do you have any idea, where things might be progressing with that? And, is there any indication from the district, or at least from the province, I said, that they might rethink that? Just wondering if you might have any ideas on that, Rob.
Yep, through you, Mayor Terziano. Yes, I've been involved in a few discussions with the Fire Marshal's office regarding this. I can tell you for 99%, well, I'll call it 100%, the Fire College campus in Gravenhurst is done and will not return. It's been basically disassembled. We have actually received, for our training center, we were given some of the training props that they used at the college, and the province is moving full steam ahead to the regional training center model, and we're fortunate enough to be part of that. So going forward, we will be delivering college programming, and we are working closely with the other fire departments within the district of Muskoka to make sure that they are able to take full advantage of our facility as well through the RTC program. And we're also going to be opening things up to a wider audience in the province as part of that regional training center network.
Councillor Whitby. You're on mute, Councillor.
Oh, sorry. I thought I clicked that once. I guess I clicked it twice. Anyway, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Chief Collins. Just a quick question. In your report for call statistics, are the false alarms, the 24 calls in the first quarter, are they included in the 89 calls?
Rob?
Yeah, through the mayor. Yes, those false alarm calls are included in those statistics, and false alarms typically are a very large portion of the call volume that we receive at any given time.
So would they be also? You mentioned that calls were down slightly, 97 last year, first quarter, 89 this year. Would it be the same ratio of false alarm calls within that 97 as well? Would that be fair to say?
It was, again, slightly lower. I'm not sure just to the exact same percentage, but the false alarm calls were down a little bit. And again, we attribute that to people being home more and maybe having their alarm systems activated less frequently.
Thank you. And just a quick, under your regular department training, I'm thinking the training topics delivered in the first 3 quarters. I think you meant to say the first quarter this year?
Sorry, yes, that would be the first quarter. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right. Looks like you're good to go, Chief. Thank you for the update.
Okay, you're welcome, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Beaver Dam report. Our manager of operations, Kevin. This report was before us back late last year, and we sent it back for some public consultation, and I guess that's happened. If you want to, I guess I'll read the resolution first. Moved by Councillor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Armour. It's recommended that committee approve the draft Beaver Dam Management Bylaw as attached. Schedule A to report Ops 2020-22, and further that the draft bylaw be forwarded to council for approval. And I have a motion to substitute. Tanya, where are you? Do I do the motion to substitute now?
Thank you, Mayor Terziano. So what you're doing is the report that Kevin brought in December. We don't want to be considering that one. However, because we have to bring it forward because it was postponed, we had to read it. You're going to substitute it
And
for
then do the new one.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This doesn't happen every day. I have a motion to substitute moved by Councillor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Armour. It is recommended that committee substitutes the motion for the following. It is recommended that the committee approve the draft Beaver Dam Management Bylaws attached Schedule A to report Ops 2021-21, and further that the draft bylaw be forwarded to council for approval. So all in favor of the motion to substitute? And that carries. So then the main motion is substituted, moved by Councillor Thompson and seconded by Councillor Armour. It is recommended that committee approve the draft Beaver Dam Management Bylaws attached to Schedule A to report Ops 2021-21, and further the draft bylaw be forwarded to council for approval. Now, Calvin, you can update us.
Well, thank you, Council. Good morning, Council. Just to go over this, the report was directed by Council to have staff look into a Beaver Dam Management Bylaw after the issue we had last year with the Beaver Dam on Williamsport. So staff went out and talked to various municipalities that had bylaws. We went with our bylaw department, and then we received some legal counsel on what we put together. In our bylaw, we have taken into consideration 3 provincial acts. The first one being the Municipal Act, where we do have permission to go onto private property for flooding to address flooding issues or concerns. The second being the Drainage Act, where it's stated persons owning or occupying land shall maintain and repair and remove blockages. And then under the Fish and Wildlife Act, there are provisions that enable a person to remove dam to protect private property, or not just private property, but to protect property. This bylaw is to kind of get homeowners and property owners to hopefully make us aware they have a dam, ask for assistance if they have a dam, so we can help them. Some of the ways property owners can bring a dam into compliance by lowering the water levels or having the dam removed. The town may enter onto private property at any reasonable time in action if there is a flooding issue or a threat there to the town property. In the case of an emergency, the town will go onto private property and address the issue immediately. And in Schedule B, gives the homeowner 2 options to sign to allow us onto their property, and to, if there's any damage, the town won't be responsible for any damage onto private property if we go in to help them to do the work, or one of our contractors going in. When it comes to dams on town property, we do weekly checks to our known areas to address any dams and to remove them and to keep the water flowing. And I'd be happy to answer any questions we have.
Thanks, Kevin. Questions, council? Deputy Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Kevin. Thanks for your presentation. Kevin, so the new bylaw, as I understand it, what you're saying is it does reflect some of the comments that council made at its last meeting with regard to this. Specifically, I think in the old bylaw, there was some concern that our bylaw officer was tasked with the responsibility of identifying when they enter a property and doing whatever they felt was best. And this bylaw, it's the person that's been assigned that responsibility is the director. And I'm assuming director of public works. So that's sort of a question. And then the second thing is, the last time we dealt with it, there was real concern as to how we approach the beaver dam itself from an environmental perspective, that there was more of an emphasis last time on we just get rid of the nuisance, right? And we had some concern, some of us, about, you know, it's part of our environment and there are better ways of managing it. And so I guess my question is, in the updated bylaw, is it your view that we've taken that approach, that we're being more flexible as to how to manage the problem as opposed to eradicating the problem? I don't know if I'm articulating that very well, but hopefully you get what I'm saying. So I sort of two questions in there about the updated bylaw.
Kevin?
Through you, Mayor. Yeah, we've put the director or his designate, so whether it be the director, myself, whoever we have that is authorized to deal with that kind of stuff, or the bylaw officer is also in there. The second part, we're just looking to assist the resident if they want assistance, they want to lower the water level, just to make it safe. They want some advice, you know, we just want a form signed so we have permission to go onto their property, and we'll advise them, we'll help them, we'll say it's a risk, we'll say it's not a risk. We're working with them.
Any other questions? Okay, all in favor of the resolution? And that carries. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Have a resolution moved by Councillor Stone, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. It is recommended that committee approve the request to assume full ownership and maintenance of Grassmere Road extension, and further that a road assumption bylaw be developed for council's consideration. Brandon.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good morning. Just very quick, a severance application came through for creation of a couple of residential lots at the back end of Grassmere Resort Road. A condition of that was to extend the road approximately 100 meters to municipal standard. So those lots had year-round frontage on a year-round maintained road. All works have been done, inspected and approved by the town. And through this report, it's just a formality administration side of things to adopt and assume ownership of that road.
Thanks, Brandon. Questions, council? Councillor Fitzgerald, your hand's up, but I think it's there from voting last time. All in favor of the resolution? And that carries. Okay, and Brandon, you're still up with the development standards, and I have a resolution moved by our Deputy Mayor Alcock and seconded by Councillor Wiebe. It is recommended that committee approve the land development standards attached to Schedule A to report Ops 2021-18. Brandon.
Thank you, Worship. The package is quite long, so I'll just give you the Coles notes of what we have here. So we did hire a consultant to help provide our development standard guidelines. And again, I will iterate that they are just guidelines. What we've had is when developments come into Huntsville, we've had a lot of moving parts. We've had policies, planning policies, building policies, other government agency policies, as well as our own internal standards. So we kind of, in essence, pulled everything together and put it into one document. So the intent of the proposed document is to provide direction to future developers and developments in a way to better plan for future growth, climate change, and promote a more sustainable future in Huntsville. In the document, we do talk about road design standards. So we talk about sidewalks, streetlights, curb gutters, culverts, storm sewers, utilities, stormwater management design standards, alteration of natural water courses, utilities, bell, hydro, gas, etc. Park development design standards, approvals, acceptance under the subdivision agreements, securities and engineering responsibilities. So really, out of all of this, not much is quite new, other than we did add in section 8, which is our park development standards. So based on certain size of developments, we have a checklist as of what type of park, type of amenities, location, how it gets registered in conjunction with the community services master plan. So we did add that in there. So if the proposed document, if approved by council, will allow town staff to work with the developers and achieve various levels of service that are proposed for future developments. These proposed levels of service will be incorporated into the town's asset management plan. Setting these levels of service is required under the town's strategic asset management policy. Another important aspect of this proposed document is that it will provide a basis of a checklist for the developer. Prior to the developer submitting an application, they will be fully aware of what is required in the town's direction for any future developments. This document will help lay out the foundation that Huntsville requires. And in my professional opinion, I mean, this document will provide functionality, efficiency, sustainability, and consistency. One thing I do want to point out is within the town of Huntsville road standards and the district of Muskoka's road standards, there is a difference. The district showing their water main located in the boulevard. The town of Huntsville is showing it back in the road where it previously was. So the town of Huntsville proposes standards to show the location under the road platform as per district's previously adopted standards. Due to the limited amount of space within a 20-meter right-of-way, the district of Muskoka and the town of Huntsville have mutually agreed to work together to have the water main located within the road platform on town roads when feasible. What sparked this was, again, a road construction on Earls Road, because due to the separations the district needs from water, ditches, salt, all that type of stuff, we ended up giving them a big chunk of land, and our road was not able to fit there. So we believe we've addressed that. And the development standards apply to only new developments and is not retroactive. So there's developments right now that are in the design stage that are subject to old design standards. If adopted by committee today, then any new developments in their brand new planning stages will be subject to these. And again, it's just guidance. We talk about securities. I know that was an issue before. We have added that in there. Overall, I think it's a very well-written document. It is a lot of information. I am happy to share my screen and show that if you wish, but it is there for your review. Open to any questions.
Okay, thanks, Brandon. I think we'll have some Deputy Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Brandon. Thanks for the report. You're right, absolutely lengthy and unbelievably timely. And I have to say, in my view, Brandon, I look at this as one of the most significant documents for the town as it works towards climate resiliency, or, you know, our climate change resiliency. And so I look at this and from my perspective, you're absolutely right. It's a great document from the purpose of combining all of the various policies and putting it in one place. That's kudos to staff for doing that and working on it, I think, and with the consultant. And certainly some sections, I think, are more in depth than others in response to the sustainability objective. If I would look at examples that would explain that, I also believe this is a really good first draft. I'm not sure from my perspective, I think it's such an important document that I would really love it if we could have another go through at the planning committee so that we can look at it at some of the categories and ensure that we've said what we want to say as a municipality. We all heard the presentation this morning. I know that's dealing with building, but there's no reason why we can't use, again, that lens looking at our development standards. I know the district is in the near future going to start working on a set of development standards criteria, a checklist, so that if a developer comes forward and says, this is what we're doing from an environmental efficiency, an energy efficiency perspective in our development, you get a big check for that, right? So at some point, the district's going to be working on that. And I think, you know, there are a couple of examples that I'll just say that illustrate what I'm talking about. One is fantastic. There's a section on active transportation. Kudos, we need to do that. And I really like the breakdown about how one goes about it depending on the size and the whether it's an arterial road or neighborhood road, all of that. But we actually say, and I know it's a guideline, but as a municipality, do we want to say it's absolutely critical that there be active transportation corridors contained within your development? So we're a bit more proactive than saying that's up to us to provide that guidance at that time. Those are nuances that I think are really important that we as a council need to say, this is where we stand on this. On the securities question, I've heard Director Hernan before saying, you know, we need to be fairly hardline around securities, and I appreciate that. But I also notice in this document, there is no reference to possible exceptions if someone is trying to develop an affordable housing community, neighborhood, block, whatever it is. And that, you know, are we as a council saying there are no exceptions with respect to securities and affordable housing? Maybe our council's not interested, but I do believe that we need to, if we're going to approve these standards today, basically we're saying those exceptions we're not open to even discussing. At least that's how I would interpret it. So my ask is that I am thrilled to see this set of guidelines today. I would love the opportunity to have another crack at it with our senior staff, you know, Brandon, you and our director of planning, and our director of public works as well, along with parks, to have that, to broaden the window and to reinforce policies where we actually want to be very proactive. Another area was around renaturalization and trees, tree preservation. And some of the language around that, as you said yourself, Brandon, it's not entirely new. And maybe we want to create some new language around some of those policies. So those are my comments. I hope that we can actually defer this for now and perhaps offer up another meeting, maybe at planning. I don't know what the right place is for that, but that's what my preference would be.
Director Hernan, I see your hand, so I'm assuming you're going to respond to some of that.
Thank you, Chair Terziano, and thank you for those comments, Deputy Mayor Alcock. I guess the first thing I'll point out is this is a guideline. So when a developer meets with staff to say, okay, I want to develop a subdivision, what's the town looking for? That's the beginning phase of this. And when it, you know, if a developer and town staff don't come to an agreement, it obviously goes back to the planning committee, and it's the planning committee that ultimately makes the decision on this. So this is the guideline that we would give somebody to work with. So it's not written in stone entirely, if you will. There is room to move. So you mentioned, you know, affordable housing and security fees. That's a council decision. But right now, when somebody asks us about the, securities, that's our answer, if you will. This has been the position that council has directed us on to date. This is where we've gone to date. Doesn't mean that somebody can't appear as a deputation to council or to the planning committee and ask for an exception to anything that's written in this document. But what this really gives is when a developer calls and says, I want to develop this 200 acres into homes in Huntsville, what sort of things does Huntsville look for? This is the beginning point. This is the beginning step off. Much of this document, as Brandon indicated, we'd had before in separate policies and pieces and all over the place. This is the one package that we can hand the developer's planner, if you will, and say, this is the sort of things that we're looking for. Dark sky friendly lighting, your transportation study to include pedestrian transportation, so we know how we're going to link them and get them around. What we're looking for in green space and parks and trails. And then there's lots of room for discussion in it. And I know on a recent development that was just before the planning committee and has received approval, we basically used this document when we worked through it with a developer to explain our stances on parks. And the developer modified everything in total understanding and agreement with it. And that's how we move the document forward. And that's where we see this. So it's a set of standards, if you will, but there's still guidelines because the developer still appears before the planning committee to get approval. And that's their opportunity to say, we disagree with what staff is asking for. This is what we're looking for, and here's our reasoning. And it's the planning committee, council, if you will, that'll make the ultimate decision. So I hope that maybe has put your mind at ease. We see this also as a living document. We see things changing in this moving forward. As standards change, as climate change becomes more of an issue for the whole community, we can see us adding more things to it. We can see stormwater management requirements tightening up even more with some talk we're hearing from the environment. So things like that would change again. So I just wanted to point out that this is a guiding document, but it's still council at the end of the day working with the developer to approve something at the planning committee and ultimately for council's approval. I hope maybe that's sort of shed some light on it.
Thanks, Steve. Councillor Armour, I think you were next. Are you still here? Did you still have a question, Councillor Armour?
Well, I did, but I think Nancy pretty well touched on everything that was in the book for us. Thanks, Nancy. Appreciate it. I just wanted to say that great report. It's good to see this coming forward. And I'm glad it's a guideline because, as you said, we can bring it back to council and make any adjustments we need. So well done, guys.
Councillor Withey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would I wholeheartedly agree with what Deputy Mayor Alcock said. I think this is a massive document. I guess one of the points that she made that I would reiterate is is there value in waiting to see or getting sort of what the district's plans are with this stuff to sort of make sure that we're working from the same information or the same desires as we go. I mean, I think that just even though it's been characterized as a guideline, there's a lot of stuff in here that I would agree with Councillor Alcock. I think I would like to defer this and go through it in more detail and perhaps look at where the district's going in some of this stuff, just to make sure that there isn't contradictions or things like that. I mean, having said that, it is well done. I think it's important, and there's a lot of work put into this. So I just kind of feel like I would like to have more time, a little more time with it. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Yes, thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, just let's keep in mind that this is a guideline, and really what Brandon has done is brought together under one document basically all of our existing policies that are in place right now. So it doesn't impinge on any future changes, any future developments. Everything is fluid, and after Monday night, especially when we passed our climate change resolution, we know that things are going to be really fluid and have to be really fluid in the months and years to come. So this is just a guideline like other departments have done. They've just made it easy for any developer coming in and saying, okay, here's what we expect of you. Thank you. And as Director Hernan has said, developers appreciate this actually, it is a starting point. So there's no reason to delay this for what the district might want to do, because the district is the district. And in their particular case, what they want to do with district facilities, they have authority over doing that. So it doesn't really impinge on what we're doing here. So I think we should just go ahead with this. It's very simple, straightforward, and a lot of work put into it by Brandon. But just to reiterate once again, it's just really bringing all of our existing policies and procedures under one document like this. So hand it to a developer and Bob's your uncle. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Your Worship, and and to Steve for the response. And to Brandon. Don't get me wrong. This is a great document. I appreciate all of the effort that's in it, and in fact, it is so timely that it does. That's why I made the comments I did, and it's not that I want to delay it. I think that absolutely developers would appreciate this guidance. I think it's really long. Like if I'm a developer going through and there's a lot of information, thank goodness they've got someone on staff to sit down with them and provide them with the guidance through it, because it is fairly long. But I go back to, and I'm glad that your response is it's a living document. So my request would be that if we are serious about adapting to climate change and becoming more resilient, then I think this kind of document is one of the most important documents a municipality can have, especially one like Huntsville that is facing incredible growth. And so I really want us to, get our message across as much as we can, that exactly what you did with the development, and I know which development you're referring to, Steve, about how we changed the parkland, but that was because we got direction that at committee that's what was really important to us. And this document does describe the different levels of parkland and how that might look. It's a nuance that it's saying these are minimal expectations from our municipality around parkland and trail development and active transportation corridors. And it's the mindset that we're trying to get across. You said it at the very beginning of the document, to meet climate change. So I'm okay with approving this, but for me, it's conditional on that it's going to come right back, various components to ensure that we are starting to implement policy that's related to climate change, because this is one of the documents where we're going to be able to make that change. And right now, I think what it's doing is pulling together all of our existing policies, and in some areas we're better than others as to our response, but other areas we're not, I think we're not nearly as proactive as we should be. So I just want the opportunity to ensure that the whole policy reflects our most current way of thinking. So I'm okay with adopting it, but I'd like the proviso that we're going to revisit elements of it, and we're going to revisit elements of it at planning. So if it's conditional on that coming back sooner rather than later, that would be great.
Mr. Weeb.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess my question is through you to Director Hernan. You'd mentioned that maybe it might be worth looking at tightening up or enhancing our stormwater policies within. I think when I think of climate change and the impacts that we suffer through periodically, more often than not, it's how stormwater affects the town, whether it's washing roads out or people's property or what have you. So I'm wondering if there is, or to Councillor Alcock's point, if there's an opportunity maybe to take a run at stormwater sooner than later. That's just the one part of it that I'm more interested in when it comes to this document. So thank you.
Steve?
Through you, Chair Alcock, Chair Terziano. First off, I just want to touch on the district standard. I'm not familiar with the new one that they're working on now that Deputy Mayor Alcock talks about, the climate change one. But the district approved about 1.5 years ago a development standard, which is very, very similar to this document. And a lot of it mirrors each other. And it was for dealing with developments on district roads. And so they were the first out of the gate with this sort of a document. And that's what we sort of mirrored because we've seen the value in it. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here. Now, I understand if the district's updating theirs, just like we've talked about, as things go on, we'll have to update ours moving forward. In regards to Councillor Weeb's question about the stormwater management, a lot of changes are going on in that field. And I'm going to let Brandon Hall speak to that because I know he's been heavily involved in some courses and some changes which are taking place. And maybe, Brandon, you can just expand a little bit on the stormwater management piece.
Through your worship. Yeah, so what we've done is our current standard for storm sewers, and let's talk about the pipes itself, the pipes that are located under the ground, under the roadway. They were designed for a 5-year return period. And on average, we're getting 10 to 15 storm events. So what we've done is we've upsized, at which we are ahead of most municipalities. We are looking at doing a 10-year design period for our storm sewers. So what that's going to allow is on these heavier rains, there will be more storage in the ground, less surcharge in the within the roadway, and less flooding on neighboring properties. So we've included that. We're looking at all our storm ponds, the criteria, the depthness, the widths, our outfalls, and stabilization to help prevent all that type of stuff. So, where this is going is we're looking at downstream catchment areas. We're looking at upstream catchment areas. We're making them incorporate a larger area than just what's there on that development. So we're making them look at what's coming into the development, what's coming out of the development, and what's already downstream. So we're taking 3 areas of impact rather than one to help with that. So.
Okay, Council, I think really nobody's expressing issues with the document that's before us, and as pointed out, it's a lot of policies we already have in place, and it is a living document. And I think if there's things we want to see added to it or specific changes, we should bring them forward. But I'm not sure we should defer a document of this size without some specific things. And I think certainly to Deputy Mayor Alcock's concerns about things that could be addressed at planning. You're the chair of planning, and I think that you can bring those forward at any time, and then they can be incorporated in. So rather than push it, I'd feel more comfortable with adopting it and acknowledging that it is living, and we will make changes to it as we go forward. So unless there's any other specific questions or comments, I might call the question. Okay, so the resolution is to approve what's before us today. All in favor? And that carries. Okay, thanks, Brandon. It is a very in-depth document, but I think it will be very helpful going forward. District Road Maintenance Agreement. A resolution moved by Councillor Armour, seconded by Councillor Thompson. It's recommended the committee direct staff to notify the District of Muskoka that the town will not be entering into a district road maintenance agreement at this time due to the fact that it would not be financially feasible for the taxpayers of the town of Huntsville. And further, that staff continue to work with the District of Muskoka on shared or combined road maintenance activities when it is in the best interest of all parties involved. Steve, do you want to speak to that?
Thank you, Chair Terziano. So this is sort of like an update because I know Mayor Terziano was questioned at District Council as to why the town of Huntsville wasn't into the road maintenance agreement. I can tell you that the agreement has been rewritten. Town of Huntsville was part of the process, even though we weren't entering into an agreement. So we've answered a lot of our concerns. The one major concern is the fiscal component of it, if you will. what the district pays for equipment rates for shared services and what it would cost the town to run the equipment don't match. We've done an analysis on our hourly rate on equipment, and it's much higher. And it basically comes down to the fact that we're including the capital cost in our equipment. We recognize that equipment wears out and it's got to be replaced, a truck 10 years, and it's got to be amortized over that 10-year period. The district has acknowledged that they don't carry capital cost in their hourly rates, because in most cases, a municipality is doing something for the district with a piece of equipment that they would have to acquire on their own anyways. And that's the agreement they've come to. In Huntsville's case, because of the number of district roads and the service level required, we would have to purchase additional equipment. A quick example would be 4 additional plow trucks at the cost of roughly $1 million every 10 years. So we've factored that in when we looked at our operational costs. The district is not prepared to pay the capital cost. So our recommendation moving forward is it's not feasible for us to enter into this agreement at this time. We'll continue with our discussions with the district. I can tell you the CAO and myself have met with the district on several occasions. We've provided all our math to them. We've provided all our numbers, our figures. They've gone away and said they'll review them and get back to us. They've never produced anything showing us how they come up with their equipment costs and their capital, but they have acknowledged that their capital cost is not included in it, and which is the stumbling block, if you will. Now, it doesn't say that we won't continue to work with the district. We've done a lot of snow removal for the district last winter, which was billed back to them for their roads. We've done combined sweeping contracts, and we looked after the majority of the sweeping for them in the town core on their district roads, and that was billed back to them. So we have a good positive relationship with the district. We've just agreed, if you will, to disagree on the equipment rates at this time. And that's what this report is basically an update as to where are we with the district agreement and why aren't we entering into it? And the answer is it's not feasible for the Huntsville ratepayers at this time. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Thompson.
Yes, not a question, but just a further comment. I think during our discussions with regard to this particular resolution, Director Hernan and Brandon and Kevin and myself, along with Colleen, we determined that if we were to take on the district roads, we would have to increase our rolling stock by 4 to handle snow plowing and so on and so forth. So there's $1 million right there that would have to be recovered through any kind of a contract we would have with them. So I think the hourly rate difference, Steve, if you wanted to get into that, was around $16 an hour type thing. The difference between what we, Steve and staff calculated was the hourly cost of running, and about $82 or $83 was what the district was willing to pay. So quite a discrepancy, really. And so I think this is the right move forward for the town of Huntsville, Public Works and the town of Huntsville.
Okay. All in favor of the resolution? And that carries. Okay, just for anyone just joining us, we did defer the transit report to next month. So we're moving to development services, and Lisa Spolnick has a communication and marketing update for us, just for information only. Lisa, welcome.
Hello, thank you, Your Worship. So the communication and marketing team for the Digging Downtown project wanted to provide a quick update to council and committee on the progress of our communication efforts. The report in front of you is for information only, and it contains a variety of statistics, so I'll try to keep my points high level today. We're continuing to execute the communication and marketing plan as approved in the November regular council meeting. We're using a variety of tactics, around 16 of them, and we're reaching and trying to reach about 7 key publics. We're seeing successes with the strategy, driven by clear, consistent communication, strong internal communication efforts with our partners and contractor, as well as the fact that construction is progressing fairly well. Feedback from businesses in the community to date continue to be quite positive, with high satisfaction rates on our April survey. However, it did indicate a few areas of improvement, such as attention to traffic congestion and better information on who exactly to contact for if individuals have questions. Our team has provided suggestions in the report on how we're addressing these moving forward. And finally, as part of our plan, we'll continue to monitor and evaluate our communication efforts. especially as construction progresses into new stages, as COVID-19 restrictions ease in our community, and as we head into our busy summer season and we see a lot more traffic downtown and in our community. That pretty much wraps up my report, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have today.
Thanks, Lisa. Questions, council? No, you guys have been doing a great job. You're right. It will probably ramp up as we open up and the summer season hits, but so far, so good, I would say.
Excellent.
So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Christopher Nagy and Kirsten Maxwell have a resolution moved by Councillor Stone, seconded by Deputy Mayor Alcock. It is recommended that currently short-term rental accommodation bylaw 2020-91 does not allow for a second license on one property. And whereas in light of a recent request, committee directed staff to report back outlining criteria for a second rental property under the STR bylaw. And whereas staff have considered the option and determined the STR program was not developed to include multiple licenses on one property due to an increased intensity of use within residential areas and should remain as one per property. Now, therefore, is recommended the committee agrees to maintain the short-term rental agreement bylaw at one license per property as adopted. Who's going to speak to this, Kirsten or Chris, or both?
I can speak to it, Your Worship. So thank you for having us this afternoon. Just want to highlight some stuff within the report. So as noted, or as you just suggested, we created this report as an outline of an as of right approach to accessory structures within the STR. Staff reviewed allowances within municipal bylaw as well as previous short-term rental staff reports, which spoke to secondary suite as an as of right. And we noted affordable housing concerns from council were found and would not be a favorable approach. Staff also had concerns that this direction would allow for a higher density of use on one lot, and through experience would lead to increasing concerns from constituents. To summarize the recommendation, we suggest that we remain as status quo, as this approach will enable neighboring properties to voice concerns through the zoning process and will enable hosts to justify reasons as to their use through the zoning approach as well as the new licensing committee. If there are any further questions, happy to answer.
Thanks, Chris. Questions from council? Councillor Armour.
Thank you, Worship. Not so much a question, it's just that I don't support single license on a piece of property. I think they're really tying our hands in our ability to treat each license application individually. I think we as a council should have that control, and I think we can control any type of density and get public input from neighboring people if they're going to put more than one building on or one more short-term rental on an area. So I don't know. I think that's something we should have the choice on.
Okay, just before I go, and I know there's lots more questions, but I just want to clarify based on that one, Chris. So the bylaw says is one license per property. Does that mean that the licensing committee can entertain individual requests and make exemption to that? Or does that mean that this is hardcore?
So to you, Your Worship, you're absolutely correct. So the process, there's two entities, right? There's the zoning process, which we've already had experience through and everything like that. So they would still need to come to planning committee, get a zoning variance to allow for that secondary unit. And there would be some public consultation within that where neighbors would be, included on that process. What would then occur is they would apply to the town, and because our bylaw does not permit that secondary suite within the bylaw directly, staff could say, we aren't in support of this, and they would be able to go to the licensing committee and plead their case on why they should have it. So basically same situation as the zoning aspect, just without that public forum of at the licensing committee itself. So yeah.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Councillor Weeb, you were next.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I was going to concur with Councillor Armour, but I'm not sure. I'm trying to work through what I just heard from Chris Nagy. So you know what? I think I'm going to come back to it. I'm going to let the others ask, and then I'll make my final comments.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Alcock?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks, Chris, for the report. I think I can be really brief because I think you answered it. Ostensibly, we stick with our current policy. We've set up a committee of council to deal specifically with those who might have exceptional cases. So the applicant can go to planning committee and get approval regarding the zoning. So if it really matters, they can go through that process, and then they take the issue of the second STR to the new committee of council. And if the new committee of council says, yeah, this makes sense, let's issue an exception to the rule, then they can approve it. And presumably that recommendation would go to council. So there is an avenue for people to have 2 short-term rentals on their property if that's what they want to do. But that's what you're saying, right?
Yes, through you, Your Worship, that is correct. And we feel that this is the best public process as well. So yeah, as opposed to just making it an as of right through the bylaw itself. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
And just clarification, anything that goes to the licensing committee does not get ratified by council. The licensing committee is a final body.
That is correct. Thank you, Your Worship. Yes.
Councillor Stone.
Thank you. So I need to recognize that we're still on a learning curve here. This is so brand new to us, and we actually are the leaders in what's happening with short-term rentals, certainly in Muskoka. So it's far too early, in my opinion, to start doubling up licenses on single properties. We don't even know how many are out there operating illegally. We're attacking that problem. We do know that short-term rentals have a serious effect on long-term rentals and homelessness. So that's a real problem that we need to be very cognizant of. So considering dual rentals on single properties right now, it's far too early in my opinion. So I agree with the staff recommendation.
Councillor Thompson.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I would agree with Councillor Stone and Councillor Alcock as well. We just passed a development standards process, and this would, I guess, the lesson we would all learn from that is we have procedures, so let's follow it. And I think this recommendation coming from staff, from Chris and Kirsten, is right on the money. So I will definitely support it.
And Councillor Armour.
Thank you, Worship. Just wanted to thank Chris for the clarifying everything there for me. That eventually it could go back through again and come back to the licensing committee. So I'm good with it now. Thanks.
Councillor Weed, did you want me to come back to you or no? Okay. So I've read the question. All in favor? And that carries. Okay. Council, I know it's 12:19, but we probably only have about 10 minutes max left. So shall we keep going? Okay. And I will acknowledge Councillor Schumacher has to leave at 12:30 today. So feel free to zoom out if we don't quite get done in 10 minutes. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Withey, seconded by Councillor Weed. It is recommended that the draft Town of Huntsville Trust Fund financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2020, as prepared by Hummel and Associates, be received and approved. Questions? All in favor? And that carries. And I have a resolution moved by Councillor Withey and seconded by Councillor Stone. It's recommended that the draft Town of Huntsville consolidated financial statements for the year end December 31st, 2020 be as prepared by Hoppel and Associates be received and approved. All in favor? And that as well is carried. Council under new business, we have a couple items. One would be the request at the beginning of the meeting for financial support for feral cats. I don't have anything prepared, but we can certainly prepare a resolution if anybody was so inclined to move one. Deputy Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd be inclined to move one in support of their request. I think that they're offering a fantastic service. It is needed. They already have, it's helpful that they were able to say the town of Bracebridge has not only supported them, but they're supporting them annually based on a report to council or whoever they need to report to. And I don't think it's a particularly big ask. So I'd be willing to support that motion, whatever that motion looks like. I'd move it.
Councillor Thompson. Councillor Thompson.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, my internet is suffering the same kind of problems that Councillor Fitzgerald just today, so it's a little spotty at times. But in any event, yes, I am in favor of this. I was just concerned to some degree by the numbers that we saw in the report. There didn't seem to be like that many feral cats that actually had been caught. So I would hope in supporting this that they would hopefully expand that program, because there have to be more than a dozen or 20 cats or whatever between the towns of Bracebridge and Huntsville that are feral in nature, and we know the kind of damage they will do to wildlife, to our bird population and our pollinators and that kind of thing. So I'm totally in favor of this, but I would hope that in the process that they expand that program or find some way to expand that program. But I will second it, Your Worship. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Weeb.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I'm in support as well. I think there's a community, I don't want to name which one it was, but not that long ago, I think in Eastern Ontario, that had basically been overrun with feral cats. And so it can be, it's not a problem until it's a problem. And you've got cats running everywhere, and then it's a tough one to deal with. So I'm certainly in support. And as they mentioned, they are, with any ongoing support, as in Bracebridge, they will be coming back with annual reports to update us. So that will be, I think, valuable to know if the program is actually working, and we can decide then if it's worth continuing that support. So I'm in support.
Okay. Madam Clerk, do you have a resolution that you're going to share with us? Because I don't think I have one.
Thank you, Mayor Terziano. I have crafted one. I just need a bit of clarification before I bring it up, if I could. The amount, I just need to know the amount, and I need to know there is $1,000 in council's special events budget, as well as about $8,000 in your council discretionary. So there is money there to take out. I just need to know how much and where. The other thing I just need to know is, as Councillor Weeb mentioned, they were going to come back with reports later. We could direct staff to come back with a report for future amounts. So however you'd like to proceed, I'm more than happy to fill in.
Councillor Alcock, as the mover, would you have an amount in mind?
I would have the amount that they requested, which was $2,000.
Okay. And Tanya, can you prepare the motion to take it out of council discretionary, I guess, for this year? I think we're fine with that, and to have part of the motion be, and that budget line item be considered in the 2021 budget. So going forward, it will become a new consideration, or 2022, sorry.
Okay, so just for further clarification, Mayor Terziano, following Bracebridge's, they did this as well, as you know, they noted that a staff report would be coming back And the report would include future amounts for council's consideration. Do you want to do that, or do you just want me to do what you just said?
Well, I don't know if you guys are short on report writing. Go ahead and do another one, but I'd be happy to say put it in the budget for consideration and save yourselves a report.
Okay, I can certainly do that. So, and further that the amount be put in the 2021 budget as well. The amount be considered for 2021?
2022, yeah.
Draft.
I assume if that's all right with the mover and seconder. Okay.
I'll just bring it up on the screen for you as well. I just want to note that although the matter is on the agenda, the motion is not, but as per Monday's council meeting, the procedural bylaw was changed, so we just need a 2/3 vote on this, and that's it.
Okay.
So I'll bring it up for you.
Thank you.
Can you see that okay?
We can. Resolution moved by Deputy Mayor Alcock, seconded by Councillor Thompson. Is recommended that committee direct staff to provide $2,000 to Muskoka Animal Rescue to assist with their feral cat project to be funded from the council discretionary budget, and further that the amount be put in the draft 2022 budget for consideration. Questions? All in favor? Oh, I got to see the screen because we need 2/3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I have a question.
Bob has a question.
Questions. Hang on, questions. Councillor Stone.
So giving $2,000 to this organization, I'm okay with, but I need to know if they're actually doing their job. Or so I need them or a staff to come back with a report.
Right. Do we have a policy when somebody gets funding that they're required to bring back a report, Tanya, or Madam CAO, or do we need to put something in the resolution?
So thank you, Madam Chair. If I just may chime in, Julia would have to speak specifically if there's a policy. I can't recall offhand. The other option is within the motion. It could be, and further that, the organization provide yearly reports. That way, prior to it being included in budget, we can make sure we just get some kind of summary from them on how many feral cats they have dealt with. So I think it could be as simple as that, Madam Chair, if Councillor Stone is open to that.
I'm happy with that. I just need some accountability.
Yeah, annual reporting.
We'll add that then, if you will, Tanya, and the mover and seconder is fine with that. That's a very good catch, Councillor Stone. Of course, we should have that. So. Okay, and further that Muskoka Animal Rescue provide a yearly report. Questions? Any further questions? Now I'll call the question. All in favor? And that carries unanimously. So that is our 2/3. Last item on the agenda, Councillor Armour has asked for a discussion around the noise bylaw generator noises. Noise. Councillor Armour.
Thank you, Worship. I've had a few residents in my area contact me about generators. These generators power up their houses when the hydro goes out, and as you know, most residents don't want to hear the generator run. So with climate change, it's happening more and more often, and people are taking these generators and putting them further back in their property, which impedes on someone else's property. So the neighbor now hears the generator running consistently. You see this a lot around lakes, where that generator running constantly around the lake is it's a noise for everybody. It's noise pollution for everybody. So what I'd like to see is staff go back and look at some way of coming up with a bylaw that these people can still have their generators, because I know how important that is to have, but some type of sound barrier that they would be able to, and maybe even where they can place them on their properties through a site plan, so that it's not impeding on everybody else. So that's my my request or my wish.
Is Chris Nagy still with us? No, I don't think so. I don't know, Kirsten, is there anything that, oh, there's Chris. Chris, is there anything that would be an easy fix for that, or Or is there any cons to trying to do something around that?
So through to you, Your Worship, happy to speak to it from a building code standpoint. So there's no requirements or restrictions as per the building code for generators. However, I wouldn't mind deferring it over to Kirsten Maxwell if that's something that could be put in under a zoning perspective.
Kirsten.
Thank you. I did look at what potentially we might be able to do with generators, and I am really hesitant in trying to put anything in place that would limit how we would let people use them, only because, as suggested, I would hate for somebody to have to go through a planning approval process with our new community planning permit bylaw when it's in place to regulate the location of their generator, for example, if that was the only thing that we were looking at, or trying to, I know I was looking at berms and that sort of thing as well. And I think we could do some education and have even reference on the website as to how people could prevent generator noise from bothering their neighbors. But I think it would be very difficult for us to try and regulate, and then very difficult for us to enforce, if that was the route that council wanted to take.
Councillor Withey, and then Councillor Weed.
Thank you, Worship. I think this could be a huge problem to get into. I know, for example, I actually just installed a Generac at my house, and there was, to the installer, it has to be a certain distance from your propane tank, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know where people are placing them. I know that my whole neighborhood has them. I think it was the last person to have them. They do cycle on and off occasionally to test themselves. And a lot of the people, like, they automatically come on when the power goes out. But a lot of people have them do that, or they want them to do that because they've got freezers full of food that if they're, if it's something they have to flip when they're there, when they're, what have you, they could lose all that. So, and wrap that all up in the new, the more catastrophic storms we're getting. I don't know. This is a really tricky one because they can only be installed in certain areas on certain properties due to proximity to propane, et cetera. It's a tough, they are enclosed. Mine isn't, I don't think, loud. Certainly when the power's out of my neighborhood, I step outside, it sounds like I'm living inside a beehive with them all going off. But, when power's out, you've got to protect your property, whether it's the depths of winter with furnaces or the summer with freezers. It's a tough one. I think we might be walking down a path there that could cause some bigger issues.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to see a little bit more education around it. I agree with Director Maxwell. I think that while enforcing some sort of legislation might be difficult, I do think people need to, when building and when when developing a property, need to be a little bit more cognizant of the way sound travels. And I think we should even develop maybe recommendations for baffles that people can put up to screen to the neighbors, because they are loud, and the sound travels quite a bit, especially around the lakes. And at times they are used a little bit excessively. So I'd like to see a little bit more education around it. I don't know how we would tackle adding it to the bylaw, but certainly I think people are often unaware when they have a cottage built or something. They're unaware of how it's affecting their neighbor. And so when people are coming for those applications and developing, I think a little bit more awareness around it would probably do a lot. So.
Councillor Armour.
Thank you. I like that, Councillor Weed, that there's some education in there, but I think there's got to be some like a barrier fence or something that people can put up between property lines to actually divert some of the noise away from the neighbor. But I agree with Councillor Withey that they're new. Everybody's getting them, as he stated. He has one now, so I think it's going to become the norm. So I think we just got to be prepared for the complaints that are going to come through for noise, especially around our beautiful lakes.
Maybe we can find out, do some research and find out if there are some sort of baffling, noise barriers or something that we could at least put out for an education piece, even though it may not be a bylaw. Tanya, why are you lit up?
Mayor Terziano, I'm just wondering if you're going to direct staff to look into that. Do you want a motion for that?
That's entirely up to Councillor Armour.
I'd like to put a motion out there that we just look into it and see what type of information package we can put together that can go right along with the building permit when you're putting out someone.
Okay, I'll just, if I can, with your permission, Mayor Terziano, I'll just put something up and you can let me know if it's okay.
Moved by Councillor Armour, seconded by Councillor Weeb. Is that fine? Staff be directed to bring back a report regarding options to address noise emissions, including an education program from generators to a regular general committee meeting. And I assume we need 2/3 to pass that.
Yes, ma'am.
All in favor? And that carries. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
That's it, Council. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Armour, seconded by Councillor Thompson. It is recommended that we do now adjourn at 12:36 p.m. All in favor? And that as well carries.
Happy Canada Day, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.